1.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is now time for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news and events across those states and across the world. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Getting straight into it, in the news this morning, yesterday Attorney General William Barr told federal prosecutors that they were allowed to investigate, quote, specific allegations, end quote, of voter fraud before the results of the presidential race are certified, while warning that, quote, specious, speculative, fanciful, or far-fetched claims should not be a basis for initiating federal inquiries, end quote. This follows a barrage of attacks on the validity of the election process by President Trump over the past week. The Justice Department's top election crimes prosecutor, Richard Pilger, resigned Monday following the announcement, telling colleagues in an email that the Attorney General was issuing, quote, an important new policy abrogating the 40-year-old non-interference policy for ballot fraud investigations in the period prior to elections becoming certified and uncontested, end quote. According to the New York Times, a Justice Department official said that Mr. Barr had authorized scrutiny of allegations about ineligible voters in Nevada and backdated mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. The official also said that Barr did not write the memo at the direction of Trump, the White House, or Republican lawmakers. Also yesterday, President Donald Trump announced on Twitter that he'd fired Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and that Christopher Miller, who serves as director of the National Counterterrorism Center, will become acting secretary, quote, effective immediately, end quote. Miller is a former Army Green Beret who fought in Afghanistan. He also previously served as the top counterterrorism policy official in the National Security Council in the Trump White House. After that job, he briefly served as a top counterterrorism policy role at the Pentagon this year. Esper broke with Trump earlier this year on whether or not to deploy active duty troops to U.S. cities. Since then, he has shied away from the public's attention, speaking in pre-recorded clips and to familiar audiences and traveling often. At least 745 new coronavirus deaths and 130,000 new cases were reported in the U.S. on November 9th. That's yesterday. Over the past week, there's been an average of 116,000 cases per day, an increase of 64% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of Tuesday morning, more than 10,191,200 people in the U.S. have been infected with COVID, and at least 238,700 have died. That's according to a New York Times database. Also, and this is a big deal, on Monday, that's yesterday, Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan signed onto a Russian-brokered settlement to end the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, withdrawing its troops from the Nagorno-Karabakh region to be replaced by approximately 2,000 Russian peacekeepers. In a statement, Pashinyan wrote, quote, I personally made a very hard decision for me and all of us. It's not a victory, but there's no defeat, end quote. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the new agreement requires both the Armenian and Azerbaijani armies to stop at their currently occupied positions. Also on Monday, Azerbaijan's foreign ministry apologized for shooting down a Russian military helicopter, an action it said was accidental. Along with withdrawing its army, Armenia agreed to surrender its control of small ethnic Armenian areas inside Azerbaijan, but not in Nagorno-Karabakh, to open a transport corridor for Azerbaijan through Armenia to the Azerbaijani exclave of Nakhchivan, and to let the United Nations oversee the return of the internally displaced people. The Russian peacekeepers will deploy for 5 years and also guard the access road over a mountain pass known as the Lachin Corridor and an approximately 3-mile wide buffer zone along its length, according to the agreement. Underscoring the loss of Shusha or Shushi, the agreement calls for a new section of access road to be built around the now Azerbaijani-controlled town, a dramatic loss for the ethnic Armenian cause in Nagorno-Karabakh. There is reportedly now a relative calm in the region following weeks of intense fighting. Jamarl, we've been reporting on this pretty consistently. This has been a big deal. And we were just talking yesterday about the eventual hopes there would be some diplomatic resolution of this problem. And here it appears to be. This is, after 3 other ceasefire attempts, 2 by the Russians, 1 by the United States, all of those seem to have failed. This seems like it might last. This has a sort of decisive, momentum to it. There's a commitment here. And of course, all the relevant parties have signed on to it. Kind of a big deal. What's your take?
Armenia lost. That's what happened. They got crushed. Their forces collapsed. And at the point where they took Sushi or Susha, whichever pronunciation people want to use, I guess they're going to go back to Azuri's pronunciation at this point. But at that point, they won. It was a clear, decisive win. The moment that they took, they were within kilometers of the capital. The prime minister didn't want to, pull out. It didn't want to sign on to the armistice. He didn't have a choice. At that point, they were going to be routed. And so they're signing an armistice. Look, this is one of those things that something had to change materially. Otherwise, this conflict, they were going to keep fighting. Turkey gave a decisive advantage, and Armenia was basically going it alone. That was his point. And I think that's somewhat of a fair point. I don't think he would have pulled out if he could have helped. So, yeah, this is a win by Azerbaijan and Turkey. And Turkey and Russia are going to, set the peace or guard the peace. But let's just be very clear. Turkey, this is a win for them. They were able to basically instigate themselves into a cold conflict, being decisive on one of the sides of that cold conflict and getting this kind of territorial gains from it, not to mention an ally from the standpoint of Azerbaijan. Yeah, it's a win.
On that last part, though, Turkey's not making the gains here. Turkey, certainly diplomatically, they might be proving themselves somewhat in the region, but Azerbaijan's the one who's made the gains. Unless I'm missing something.
Azerbaijan might have been the one that made the gains, Shane, but who do you think was helping them to do it?
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, Turkey, as we've been reporting from the beginning, I was just unclear literally if there was something that I was missing, whether Turkey was granted territory.
Oh, no, I didn't mean it that way.
Ultimately,
no, I didn't mean it that way. I just meant influence.
Ultimately, Russia seems to be the big party. Yeah. Russia seems to be Russia is the country that made this possible. Russia is the country that made this diplomatic agreement possible. They're the ones that brought everybody together. Theirs are the peacekeeping troops that are now in the region. You're saying it's a win for Turkey, but ultimately this has been a long-term frozen conflict that could have escalated into a world war.
Actually, I say it was a win for Azerbaijan and Turkey. But go ahead.
You don't think so? I think that if
I think it's a win for both. Look, you could say that Russia brought the people to the table. That's true. But keep in mind, the peace deal wasn't going to last until there was some kind of territorial change. And when Azerbaijan got the territory back, at that point, they were like, all right, let's make a deal. Meaning they were open for it at the point where they made their territorial gains. And at the point where Armenia, basically couldn't continue to fight. No, Russia, of course, brokered that deal. And they made that deal possible by bringing everybody to the table. But I'm making the point that the fact that they were able to get territorial gains in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is what they wanted to begin with, was part and parcel to the reason that these guys were coming to the table. It's instantiating their gains. That's my point.
They definitely made gains compared to Armenia. Armenia did not make gains here. That's just to be clear. That's what happened. They're the losers in that category. Azerbaijan definitely the winners. But it's not just Turkey. Through Baku, Azerbaijan has made a bunch of oil money. They've been able to take that oil money, plunk it down into their military. And, in alignment with Turkey, certainly with the support of Turkey, they made this happen. But it was also Azerbaijan, due to its own economic momentum, sort of making its growth. I guess what I wanted to be clear about here is that Russia, in my opinion, diplomatically, certainly, especially compared to the U.S. with Pompeo trying to get involved, trying to broker that third ceasefire, that failed. Russia sort of appears to have decisively resolved at least this current iteration of the conflict, and hopefully in the long run as well. And that's good for them. That's good for the region. That's good for the world, frankly, It is. And like I said, they're going to keep the peace.
Look, it shows you Russia's diplomatic skill, man. They were able to broker this deal. Like I said, I think the deal was able to be brokered at the point where they made their territorial gains. But Russia had been there from the beginning, and they had been working diligently to try to get these two sides to stop the fighting. In this case, they made it possible. Or they lived. Yeah. They provided a pathway, let's say it that way, for these guys to come together.
All right, next headline here. 3 men are on trial in Spain for helping the perpetrators of a double jihadist attack in 2017 in Barcelona and a nearby seaside town that killed 16 people. The Islamic State claimed responsibility for the double attack, which also wounded 140 people on August 17th and 18th in Barcelona and Cambrils, a resort about 60 miles to the south of Barcelona. Although prosecutors have not charged any of the men with direct responsibility for the bloodshed, they are being charged with helping the attackers, one of whom rammed a van into pedestrians on Barcelona's Las Ramblas Boulevard, leaving 14 dead, among them 2 children, aged 3 and 7. Several hours later, 5 of the driver's accomplices staged a second attack in Cambrils, ramming pedestrians and stabbing a woman who died of her injuries. All 5 were shot dead by police. And again, 3 men accused of helping those attackers are now on trial in Spain. The Taliban today called on the incoming administration of U.S. President-elect Joe Biden to stick to a February agreement from this year to withdraw U.S. troops. The United States has been pulling out troops under the deal, which foresees a complete withdrawal by May, subject to certain security guarantees, while the Taliban continues to hold peace talks with the Afghan government in Doha. The group said in a statement that, quote, the Islamic Emirate would like to stress to the new American president-elect and future administration that implementation of the agreement is the most reasonable and effective tool for ending the conflict between both our countries, end quote. President Donald Trump has made ending the war in Afghanistan a major campaign promise, saying in a tweet in October that troops could be out of Afghanistan by Christmas. Back in the U.S., the world's first crewed Hyperloop trip was a success. At Virgin Hyperloop's DevLoop facility in Nevada, 2 passengers were fired through a 500-meter tube on Sunday evening. The company says it marks a new frontier in the development of the transportation technology. Company co-founder Josh Geigel and head of passenger experience Sarah Lukian were on board for the first run. In order to maintain a comfortable experience for acceleration and braking, the capsule's speed in this test was limited to 107 miles per hour. That's less than half of the pod's top recorded speed in the tube, which maxed out at 240 miles per hour during tests at the end of 2017. That's mostly due to the length of the tube, though 500 meters isn't long enough to reach the sort of speeds that the company promises. The tech will likely reach higher speeds when the second Hyperloop facility is built in West Virginia. Jamarl, I'm guessing you've been following this for a little while. This seems like it might be up your alley.
I was. It's funny. I was going to put the story into the headlines, and so I'm so glad that you guys were able to get it. I was so excited about this story, I nearly invested in this stock. That's how excited I was about the story. Because the Hyperloop thing is such an amazing idea. Like, if you think about, this thing is supposed to get up to like 600 miles per hour, speed-wise. And you think
in the
trains,
long run,
you think of cars, you think of airplanes. But now, this is an entirely new technology. Yes, you have maglev trains. But the speeds and everything else that this promises is phenomenal. It could be underground, it could be overground, you could talk about stuff underwater, all sorts of stuff. And you're talking about travel just as fast, if not faster than flights over land. I was excited about this, like nobody's business.
Totally. And I mean, one of the cool ideas about this that doesn't get talked about quite as often, like you're saying, there are other technologies like the maglev train, for instance, that go maybe not quite as fast as 700 miles per hour on ground in a lot of cases, but still do go pretty quickly. But the real thing here is it can be in small pods. You don't need to have like a full-on train. In other words, you don't need 600 people or 500 people or whatever in a single unit going to a location. You can have like 2 to 4 to, a family-sized little pod that's going to its own destination on its own timetable. It's like that level of variability and specificity that you would expect from a passenger car, that we got sort of for the first time on this mass basis with just literally the advent of the car, the automobile. But on this super fast, super intense scale. Now, of course, it's having to follow a grid, and we'll see how it actually works. But yeah, I thought this was exciting too. Anyway, last headline here. Facebook has taken down a network of pages related to the Stop the Steal movement. Those the 7 pages, which had more than 2 million followers, are reportedly linked to former Trump campaign head Steve Bannon. Stop the Steal, by the way, is about the election, stopping the stealing of this election. Facebook told the Washington Post that the pages used, quote, inauthentic behavior tactics, end quote. I have no idea what that means. That is gobbledygook tech speak. Company also took down a group that had been named Stop the Steal, but was later renamed to, quote, Gay Communists for Socialism, end quote. No comment there. I think that's what they mean by the inauthentic behavior tactics thing. Now that I think about it, of course.
I think that means like leading behaviors, like doing things that aren't the way people typically engage with technology. It's doing it for other reasons. That's the way I took it.
Shouldn't we be able to use technology for purposes other than those created by the creators of that technology? I'm going off into a little tangent here, but wasn't that like Steve Jobs' whole vision, that you had this personal computer that you could use in whatever way you saw fit, like a bicycle. Anyway.
Like the intelligence services basically using Twitter undercover to try to influence opinion.
Like that. Yes, sure. Yeah. Maybe
like it's not used for the purpose of the system. That's my point. I mean,
yeah.
That's all I mean.
Yeah. The takedowns came days after the social network removed another Facebook group called Stop the Steal, which had gained hundreds of thousands of followers in its first 24 hours. And with that, those are our headlines. More to talk about during the show. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're going into a break, and we will be back on the other side of this break with Jamarl's monologue. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Octung, baby.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, give us a like and definitely share the content. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, and we appreciate you for allowing us to do what we do. This is a quote by a member from the Nixon campaign, and we had the conversation about the drug war yesterday. Listen to this. I love this quote. This quote is fascinating to me. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that, this is Ehrlichman, one of his henchmen. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and the black vote. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Now, this was caught by journalist Dan Baum for the Harpers, and this was Ehrlichman in 1994 talking about his work in the Nixon White House, basically using the drug war to criminalize blackness and, for that matter, being on the left. That's an astonishing quote. Now, the question that I have is, did Obama know that? Did the African-American pot-smoking president that was supposedly on the left, did he know that? When he was in office for the 8 years, did he know that the drug war was started as a way to lock up blacks and hippies, to castigate them for entirely political reasons? Think about the number of people who are sitting in prison today. Think about the number of people who are being dragged to prison for pot or some other drug during the Obama administration, even when he turned a blind eye to say, okay, I'm not going to go after the states. Regardless of not going after the states, Trump didn't go after the states. You still allowed it to be on the books. Section 1, Category 1, or Schedule 1. If you're in Texas, if you're in one of these states that are not legal to smoke, you're going to jail. The point I'm trying to make here is, did the Democratic Party know that? And when you know that, and you keep it on the books anyway, what does it say about you and your party, especially from the standpoint of representation? Is progressive something that you are, or is it something that you become because of what you do? Oftentimes, people like to use that word and just throw it around. Hillary Clinton said she was a progressive. Obama said he was a progressive. Kamala Harris believes she's a progressive. Everybody wants to be a progressive all of a sudden. And yet, it doesn't quite seem that these people know what this means. And it's basically the destruction of the word because they can't necessarily live up to the word. It's like grading on a curve. Instead of, a 95 being an A, a 44 gets a B minus. Listen to Clyburn here. And Clyburn is the one who basically made the point that says blacks need to shut up about being taken advantage of by the Democratic Party. And here's Kamala Harris. Apparently, she was the thing that says, here's the give back to the black community. Kamala Harris. Listen to Clyburn. Clyburn has a very important function. And I want you to hear what that function is. Listen to what's being said here. Listen to Clyburn go after this whole thing of progressive.
Well, let me say this. There ain't nobody in the Democratic Party of the United States of America that's more progressive than Jim Clyburn. Nobody. I met my late wife in jail protesting the status quo. John Lewis and I, you would not call John not progressive. But John would never yell, burn, baby, burn. John would never say defund the police. As progressive as he was. And I'm just as progressive as anybody else. But I'm practical about politics. And just because it works in my district.
Notice what he did. He gave cover to Democrats using something as sacred as the civil rights movement and even a dead body John Lewis, civil rights icon, even dragging his corpse up in order to use that as a prop to cover Democratic failures and criticism of that failure. What he's talking about here is the Democratic Party expected to do far better than what they did. Biden makes it up by the skin of his teeth. I mean, they're going to go to a recount in Georgia. You're going to also, my prediction was that Biden was going to win it. They were going to retain the House and take the Senate. Right now, the Senate is apparently up for runoffs. Biden barely wins by the skin of his teeth, and Democrats are upset that the people who are in the House of Representatives lost, and they're looking for somebody to blame. In this case, they're looking to blame lefties. Now, forget the fact that the people who backed Medicare for All won. Forget the fact that the Democratic Socialists of America did extraordinarily well. Forget the fact that they had like 20-something people get elected, and when you look at some of the progressive policies like medical marijuana or decriminalization, those things did monstrously well. No, the people who were against Medicare for All lost. The polling on Medicare for All on election night had like 70-something% for Medicare for All, in addition to some of these other medical policies. I'm making the point that what Clyburn is doing here is using race and issues of identity and acting as if that is the totality of progressiveness, pretending as if economics doesn't matter or that it's not even on the table. When people are attacking the Democratic Party and they're saying, hey, what about Medicare for all? Hey, what about increasing the minimum wage? What about expanding Social Security? What about elimination of student debt? When they're making the point for these things are popular, especially during an economic downturn. Your issue here is that you guys didn't represent anything. If I had to blame progressives for anything, it would be backing you all. Right now, they're looking for people to blame. And Clyburn, again, dragging the corpse of John Lewis and using that, running behind it to try to excuse blame. This John Lewis was progressive. I'm progressive as anybody else in Congress. I met my wife in jail. Again, this is not an issue of identity. This is an issue of class. This is an issue of economics. And once again, Clyburn, and honestly, many of the African Americans in the Democratic Party tend to use identity issues, holding it up as cover for failure and for any criticism of that failure, especially on issues of economics. You have John Kasich, anti-choice, anti-labor Republican, Kasich, giving Democrats advice on who they should and who they shouldn't listen to. The best thing that happened is Joe Biden is the fact that the United States Senate is going to either be Republican or very close. Kasich said, angling for a cabinet post. Romney apparently also is going to get a cabinet post. And as far left can push him as hard as they want, and frankly, the Democrats have to make it clear that the far left almost cost him that election. Again, Kasich couldn't even deliver Ohio, and the people who expanded the vote totals in states that the Democratic Party lost, those lefties did deliver those states. The Democratic Party wants to listen to people like Kasich of the world. They don't want to deal with the fact that they should have done monstrously better in this race, and they ultimately nearly lost it to Trump. Shane, once again, this notion of identity is being used to dodge issues of class. And people like Clyburn, who considers himself a civil rights icon, which he is, and digging up the dead body of John Lewis to even use that as a dodge for failure and for not doing as well as they believed they were going to do. And blaming lefties for this, despite the fact that the policies that they were complaining about were monstrously popular, even if you look at Fox News' poll on election night. What do you think about this?
I mean, with the bit about John Lewis, it makes sense that we would do that. We do that with the old and the wise, and even the deceased. You bring them up and wonder, you speculate about what they might think about what's going on, and you try to use them as a sort of role model to guide what you're going to do. Broadly, when you're talking about race and class, there's the tragic irony here, which is that when a lot of people are talking about issues of race, they're also tacitly talking on a deeper level about issues of class. And so if you're going to use, in other words, if you're talking about the plight of Black Americans, that's largely an economic plight. That's largely it has to do with these deep historical inequities. And, even bringing it up, at least part of it is you're talking about, okay, well, there's this big gap in all these different areas of society. That's sort of a lot of the point of bringing that up. And so if you're going to use it to dodge the underlying real discussion there on the material inequalities, then you're doing disservice to yourself. You're doing disservice to the whole cause. And I mean, this issue keeps coming up, not just specifically because obviously America has a history of doing pretty racist stuff and being foundationally a somewhat racist country in these deep ways, but it persists to this day. Keeps coming up because we haven't solved those problems. It's like we haven't done the nation building on ourselves. We haven't done the sort of reconciliation and attempted reunification as a country, which would come with a price tag, frankly. We're not willing to do that, and it's going to keep coming up until it either does us in or we're outdone by somebody else.
I guess my point here is Clyburn is calling himself progressive. He's taken millions of dollars from pharma and these other defense industries. And when I talk about race, and when we bring people on the show and they talk about race, oftentimes they're talking about race and class. Democrats don't do that, though. When they're talking about race, they try to sever it off as if it's something separate and distinct. For example, the reason why I bring up Medicare for all, or the reason why I bring up the drug laws, I'm trying to make the point that progressive is not what you are, is what you do. And you get a categorization based on what you do, but not just as you exist in the void somewhere. It doesn't work that way. I'm making the point that the drug laws that's on the book could have been changed by the Democratic Party. That would have been something to the left and would have been beneficial to the entire public. The Medicare for all thing. I'm telling you, blacks don't care about Kamala Harris. They would care about health care. They would care about college. I'm making the point that it's what you do, not what you rhetorically say. And Clyburn, who's here talking about he's progressive and everything else, he's using identity entirely to eliminate the other stuff. What he's complaining about are people saying, hey, let's forget Medicare for all. Well, he doesn't want that. So what does he do? Well, I'm just as progressive as the other person, and here's the corpse of John Lewis to say so. And it's like, dude, we're talking about healthcare. What are you talking about? We're talking about college. What are you talking about? Like, I'm being very specific when I'm talking about policy. And oftentimes, they are not. And I hate this notion of these guys using civil rights, something that I consider sacred, as a way to avoid blame. I mean, that's basically what's taking place here. They want to blame ALC. They want to blame the squad, Ilhan Omar. Fact is, these people won. And, Minnesota flipped, meaning they delivered their states. Kasich didn't. The Republican total, if I'm not mistaken, went up, not down. So it's aggravating to me that they do this. That's all. And the people in his state, even when Sanders lost, the majority voted for Medicare for all. Did you know that? Like during the primaries, even with Sanders losing that state, Medicare for all still had a majority of the vote. I'll end it here. I just get so aggravated with this because it does impact human beings, and the way that he's talking about this stuff is a way of trying to avoid it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and...
Hello, Ian.
Hello.
Hi, we got you scheduled for the interview with Fault Line.
Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Ian Schilling. He's a geopolitical analyst, a researcher, and a blogger. Ian, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Hi, guys. I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, thank you so much for coming back on. For those listening, Ian Schilling, great guest, former guest on the show. Very glad to have him back. I'll just get right into it. By appearances, at least, Joe Biden has been elected the president-elect of the United States. I'm curious, looking at that from the other side of the Atlantic, from the other side of the pond, what's your take on what that's going to do to not just U.S.-UK relations, but U.S. foreign policy? How do you think that's going to affect United Kingdom's Brexit from your end? Ian?
Things are going to get worse with Biden. Biden hates the UK, right? He was asked a question about what do you think about the UK, and he said, I'm Irish, and the Irish hate the Brits. So that was a really good start. So he's not going to do a trade deal. So, I mean, the Boris Johnson and co were trying to do a trade deal with the US. Okay, free trade deal, they call it, but it's not a free trade deal. But anyway, Biden will not be doing anything like that. He'll just stall it. So there won't be a trade deal. He's going to stir up the Russian conflict, right? Put more troops in Europe, in Poland or wherever. So he's going to destabilize Europe, right, with NATO and whatever. And he's going to stir up all the Russian nonsense and escalate the conflict with Russia, because that's what he's going to do. So, I mean, there's lots of horrible things he's going to do. And he's certainly not going to stop the wars in the Middle East or whatever. He's going to keep the sanctions on all different countries like Venezuela and Iran and whatever else. So things are not going to get better. They're going to get worse.
Yeah, from a foreign policy standpoint, I am greatly concerned with the Biden administration. Whether that's the story that we did earlier about Afghanistan, where Trump was trying to pull the troops out in the deal, and the question is Joe Biden going to stay with the deal to pull them out? Is Trump going to try to pull them out in advance of Biden coming in? Like, what's going to take place from a standpoint of a lame duck Trump, especially as he engages with the rest of the world? I'm also curious about Brexit and what that means with a Biden as opposed to a Trump. Now, the trade deal that Trump was going to give the UK, and he was going to give you guys a trade deal, but most likely he was going to take his pound of flesh, especially from the standpoint of the NHS, where I know that there was no way Trump was going to make a deal without having the NHS being on the table. What is that going to look like with Joe Biden? Or is that trade deal going to, again, is he going to try to advance it?
I don't think
Biden coming in. It seems like it would just be too soon.
Yeah. Trump was trying to angle to cut and slice the NHS and privatise parts of it, wasn't he? Getting American companies contracted to supply what are now NHS services and stuff like that. So they were going to cut and slice it. Trump was trying to. Biden's just not. Why would Biden want to do a trade deal with the UK if he hates the UK? He's not going to bother. He's got loads of other things he'll concentrate on. He'll escalate all the wars, and he'll do all the slush money with the big pharma vaccines and whatever else, wouldn't he? I mean, he's going to do all the COVID stuff and force people to take vaccines and pass lots of laws. He's going to do mandatory mask orders outdoors nationwide. That's what he said he's going to do. And he's going to enforce more lockdowns, which will just kill more people and cause more unemployment. It'll be terrible.
Cause more unemployment. I mean, even if Joe Biden does a lockdown, it kind of depends on what the government does. I mean, the problem with the lockdown that Trump put through is that he wasn't supporting, meaning you can't have it both ways. You can't say we're going to shut everything down. Also, we're not going to provide for you. You can't have it both ways. I mean, you're basically going to put people in a situation where they can't live. That was the issue. Less the lockdown, if that makes sense.
Well, yes, that definitely makes sense. Yes, that's true.
So I'm curious with the trade deals. So if he's not going to get the trade deal, how Bojo and the EU, it doesn't necessarily seem like the Brexit thing is going all that well. And it seems like no deal is once again back on the table.
Yeah, all the negotiations with the EU are just stonewalled. They're stalemate at the moment. I mean, they're going to do brinkmanship till the last possible day, just like they've done in the past. So whenever some deadline comes up, they'll all say, "Oh, we can't negotiate anymore, and we're not going to give any concessions or whatever." And then at the last minute, they do something. But at the moment, we could well go without any deal at all, no deal Brexit with the EU. Right, which should also be another thing.
It seems like folks in Britain are rather fatigued about the whole process. It seems like, a couple of years ago it was the hot topic. At this point, like you're saying, if it's just negotiating tactics where the can keeps getting kicked down the road effectively. How do people feel about that? I mean, what are people thinking about over in the UK? That's a stupidly broad question, perhaps, but just maybe to give us a sense.
Well, it's not a big hot topic issue because all the COVID thing and all the lockdowns are the big hot topic issues. Right? All this lockdown is just imposed a national lockdown. He presented totally fraudulent data to the entire country and MPs. He said that the infections were spiraling out of control and the NHS was going to collapse in 2 weeks unless we do something drastic. Whereas the actual data said that the infections have been flatlining for over 2 weeks, and the number of new hospital admissions is flattening off, levelling off. And the NHS managers got a report 2 days before that said there was no health crisis in the NHS whatsoever, apart from a couple of hospitals in the northeast. Like, so 2 hospitals out of 200 or something were at capacity, and the other 198 weren't. It was totally fraudulent. It's all been in the papers that it was totally fraudulent. Right? Lots of papers have reported it. The BBC hasn't, of course, but there's several other papers that have. So everybody knows it was totally fraudulent. So, I mean, the MPs should be demanding a revote on the lockdown because they were deliberately deceived with fraudulent data that was totally false. And they knew it was false when they were presenting it.
Why do you think, or why would Boris Johnson, assuming, let's say for the moment, the data was false, why would they do that? What would be their motivation for doing something?
The motivation is to justify the vaccine. Everything is pushed to the vaccine, right? They want to jab everybody in the UK with this non-safety tested vaccine. It takes 5 years to safety test a new vaccine. The ones that they are producing now from Pfizer and Moderna are a completely new type. They're mRNA vaccines that inject genetic material into the cells to then produce this spike protein, which then induces an immune response. So they are altering the genetic material within cells permanently. Right? Nobody knows what the adverse effects of this new technique, injecting genetic material into human beings, will be because nobody's done it before. And they're gonna jab people after 6 months testing.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, they've started to give emergency samples of it. I agree with you on this. I am not one of those people that want to be, forcibly injected with anything. And especially after some rapid, moonshot of a vaccine that took place in the course of a few months. I don't trust that. And I'm, be the last person to get stuck with that. So I understand where you're coming from with this, and I agree with the concern. Let's put it that way. The last I saw on this, that apparently they're injecting this into people who are in, I guess, in emergency situations. And so, look, they're saying they're in phase 3 studies of this test and everything else. What are your main concerns? I mean, I have this kind of zombie apocalypse thing in my head where one person gets mutated, that person bites somebody else, and we find that the COVID.
We don't know, but I mean, who knows what nobody knows what the effects might be because it's never been done before. Right, so something that's never been done before needs really high levels of testing to see what the effects are on, relatively few number of people. You don't want to, nobody would ever accept that you say developed a new drug, right? But you're only going to do 3 months of testing on it, right? And then you're going to inject 50 million people. Would people agree to a drug, right? Say they said that this reduces cancer or something, a cancer drug or whatever, right? Or would they say, well, no, you normally take 2 years testing a new cancer drug. We want it tested for 2 years, right? People wouldn't accept it if it was a different type. I mean, a vaccine is a drug like any other drug, right? They're injecting stuff into your body, right, which affects your body's metabolism, your cell behavior, your immune system, whatever. It's a drug like any other drug, but they don't call it a drug, do they? They call it a vaccine.
Well, I mean, it's a vaccine. I mean, the entire point of a vaccine is to create an immune response so your body can push back against the infection. I mean, that's just kind of, it is what it is. Whether it's a new class of drug or not, I'm not quite sure. But it is what vaccines do. If I'm not mistaken, there's some that have like inert material, but Yeah, they want to provoke an immune response from your body, so the next time your body comes in contact with it, it recognizes it, whether it's a flu vaccine or something else.
It relies on this spike protein because that's the only thing that it's targeting. Okay, the new strain of vaccine from these minks in Denmark have mutated the spike protein, and none of these vaccines will work on that strain.
Well, right.
And the virus might mutate in the same sort of way in other places.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you get normal herd immunity, the body doesn't just target one protein; it targets a whole range of things with T cells and immune memory cells and whatever else. Right. So even if the virus mutates a bit, you've still got a lot of immunity. That's why a lot of people have got natural immunity already from catching previous colds and flu, right? A number of people, 20 to 50%, are already immune from COVID.
Yeah,
right?
But that immunity only lasts for a few months or a few weeks.
No, it doesn't. No.
Yeah, no, really, it does. I mean, all of the research that they've done up to this point has shown short-term immunity. We're not even sure.
They're only measuring the level of antibodies, right? But if you get infected again, right, the T cells will immediately react because they've already recognised this virus as a threat, and they will rapidly produce more antibodies, and you won't get ill.
And you know that as a flat fact.
Well, there's only been 5 people been reinfected out of 50 million cases in the world.
Okay.
Right, so 5 people.
Wait. Ian, let's do this. Let's take a break. I'm going to bring you back. This is geopolitical analyst, researcher, and blogger Ian Schilling, and we will be back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you, capital of the world, Washington, D.C. We are joined by Ian Schilling, geopolitical analyst, researcher, and blogger. Ian, I'm hearing that your account on Twitter was suspended.
Yes, I've been permanently banned.
Are you serious? Now, what? Okay. Like, we've been talking to people who Twitter has been banning. I mean, one gentleman, he was banned for just repeating a speech or just transcribing a speech from like a Hezbollah leader or something to that effect. And they banned his account. What did they ban your account for? What was the reason or rationale?
I replied to a tweet by a London radio station that was interviewing Matt Hancock, and replied saying we don't want his toxic vaccines and stop trying to poison people. Matt Hancock has committed mass murder and should be hung for treason. So they banned me for that.
That's amazing. Look, I have the same concerns about the vaccine stuff that you do. Like, it's this kind of rush to a vaccine, and it's like, well, what about the safety protocols? How are you guys making this stuff that fast, etc.? So I feel you on that one. That's funny that they ban you for that. That seems a little extreme.
Well, I was stupid by replying to it, because I mean they've been targeting me for ages and reporting me. I mean all the neocon shells or establishment shells. I mean, they got loads of trolls operating on Twitter and whatever. So I regularly got at least two reports of my tweets a week, at least 2 every week for the last 2 years. Okay, on different things. And then it would say, oh, no, we've investigated this and we haven't taken any action for this one. And that was most of the time, 80 or 90%. But then they were other ones that, oh, we've banned you for 12 hours or we've banned you for a week or whatever. when I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just calling out their lies.
That is greatly unfortunate. Like, look, it's one of those things, like you said, we weren't doing anything wrong. You were just using their platform. And if I remember, I think I follow you on Twitter myself, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, we've been following each other for years.
Have we? I thought you were familiar. I was like, he sounds familiar to me. Looks familiar to me. I remember, if I remember correctly, they called you a Russian bot, right?
Yeah. That's what you did. You did a great podcast on my interview on Sky News and dissecting it and analysing it and what the Sky News were trying to twist the conversation around to, and I was batting it back.
I remember
you did a great analysis of that.
I remember that.
2018, that was.
Yeah, I remember that. Because they were basically trying to make it as if you were some kind of bot.
Yeah.
And they did that to Maram also. They were trying to make it as if she was a bot. And it's like, no, I'm actually a real person. And you're trying to pretend as if I don't quite exist. That's astonishing. Wow. So I'm curious, what is the political climate right now in the UK? I mean, you have, the Brexit thing going on. You have the lockdowns going on. You have COVID thing. Like it seems like you have so many things that are going on all at once. Even the Scottish independence type thing, where there's this kind of movement going on.
Oh, well, that's a bit.
Yeah.
But people are trying to organise protests against all this lockdown and all these draconian laws, and protests against mandatory mask orders and mandatory vaccines and whatever else. But the police are trying to shut them down. And now the British Home Secretary has banned protests of more than 2 people. So all our freedoms and democracy is thrown right out the window. How can you have a protest with only 2 people? It's ridiculous.
That's amazing. Basically, they just don't want you to protest. That's what that boils down to.
They don't want any dissent, and they don't want anybody to see any dissent.
What about opposition from the standpoint of Labour? Ken Starmer of the world. I mean, you guys have basically, the Labour Party has kicked out Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
Which is astonishing. I mean, look, the anti-Semitism stuff was used as a weapon to go after Jeremy Corbyn. Corbyn fed into it. And unfortunately, the party basically axed them, their leader, which is, symbolic of that left wing of the party and what that left wing represents and the hatred that, neo-libs, the Blairites of the group have towards people like Corbyn.
Yeah. Oh, Keir Starmer is a Blairite. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn did lots of stupid things, right? He should have kicked all the Blairites out of the Labour Party and out of the parliamentary Labour Party. Right? He definitely shouldn't have employed Blairite Keir Starmer as his exit secretary. That was extremely stupid, right? But so what did they do as soon as the Blairites got back into power? Oh, they kicked Corbyn out. They could see what would happen. I mean, Corbyn needed to be more forceful. He shouldn't have carried out all these false anti-Semitism allegations. He should have fought back and said, this is a complete load of garbage. You're making up lies. There isn't any, there's no systematic anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party. There's very little. I'm not saying there's nothing, but 5 people out of 500,000 isn't a problem, is it? I mean, that's what they're talking about.
Well, also, so they're conflating Israel and...
they did it. It's not anti-Semitism. Right. It's that he's not a rabid Zionist supporting Israel, isn't it? That's why they did it. That's the other reason they did it. They wanted to kick him out as party leader, and they don't like anybody that's not rabidly pro-Israel.
Yeah. He thinks Palestinians
I think that's how that...
and that makes him anti-Semitic.
You're talking about... Ian, you were talking about Corbyn. Is this just can you just chalk this up to personality? Is that why he didn't push back? What do you think it was? Was there, in other words, was there a sort of political dynamic other than the Israel Zionist anti-Semitic connection, or was it a personality distinction? What do you think was actually going on there?
There's a whole range of things why the establishment wanted to get rid of Corbyn. I mean, MI6 and the entire media, or the oligarch and corporate controlled media wanted to get rid of him. The BBC wanted to get rid of him. MI6 wanted to get rid of him. MI5 wanted to get rid of him. Everybody wanted to get rid of him. Everybody in the establishment wanted to get rid of him. Okay.
What was the name of that secret organization that was paid for? It was like money coming from the government. It was like the Foreign Service or something that was running attack ads or attack tweets against Corbyn, despite the fact that it was being paid by the British government.
Integrity Initiative, yes. The Integrity Initiative was a propaganda construct funded by the UK's Foreign Office that then targeted anybody who was anti-neocon or anti-establishment. Right? So Corbyn fitted both those. So they then used sock puppets, propaganda hacks in the mainstream media to constantly attack Corbyn. With most of it was completely false, right? But the Guardian, which is supposed to be the left-wing Labour Party supporting paper in the UK, was running about 6 attack particles on Corbyn every week. It's one a day at least. It's ridiculous. And they're supposed to be the Labour Party supporter. You can imagine what it was like in the right-wing press.
The Integrity Initiative, they're still kind of kicking around, but it seems like they mostly shut down in 2019, late 2019, right? I mean,
yes,
you're speaking in the past tense.
But I'm sure they're doing it under some other setup. Right, and they've still got the 77th Brigade, which is the British Army propaganda unit, which is all over social media trying to change opinions, and any paper, any mainstream media comment sections, they're all over that as well, trying to change public opinion, right? So there's the actual COVID task force has got their own propaganda groups pushing out propaganda into the mainstream media to try and brainwash people with lies and deceptions. It's terrible. The British government has declared war on its own people. That's what they've done. They've declared war on their own people.
Why do you think they declared a war on their own people? Because they're trying to deal with COVID?
No, they're not trying to deal with COVID. They want control. This is all this World Economic Forum, the Davos, the Great Reset, right? Their purpose is the Great Reset. They're going to impoverish and destroy the middle class. They're going to remove property from people. They're going to impoverish ordinary people. They're going to cause mass unemployment, right? So that the oligarchs and the corporations, the multinational corporations, can control everything. Have you read The Great Reset and what they're up to?
I'm familiar with that. What's your take on Klaus Schwab?
He's a disgusting, mass-murdering psychopath and the enemy of every decent person on the entire planet.
Founder, of course, of the World Economic Forum. That is I've seen a lot of people talking about that. I've looked into that a bit myself. I mean, here's the thing, kind of bringing it full circle back to the conversation on COVID. I get what you're saying. Here's the thing. People will use the phrase "plandemic" as if this was planned from the beginning. As far as I can tell, I mean, and we can get back to the specifics. We only have a couple minutes left, but it broke out in China. The Chinese and Russian governments responded first and foremost. They responded pretty strictly to the spread of this thing. Do you see this as various authorities sort of tapping into the growth of the virus, or do you see this as something that was planned from the beginning? What's your take, Ian?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I'm open to both options, right? But as soon as it started happening, and as soon as it got to Europe, then they went into the plan to stoke up the mass hysteria, didn't they? And all the media was full of pictures of hospitals in Italy with people with masks on and whatever else, right? So they from February they just pushed fear. It was fear 24 hours a day, right? That's what they did to stoke up the hysteria, right? So I mean, I don't know whether they caused it in the first place or they just took advantage of it when it happened. But I mean, they had this event 201 in October 2019 that was organised by Bill Gates and the Johns Hopkins University that did exactly this scenario of a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic with some deadly virus, and what they would do to control people, manage disinformation, i.e. censorship, right, and stoke up and control people.
Well, so this is from the beginning, for many months now at this point, people have been talking about Event 201. The thing that's weird to me about that, I mean, where I would push back is that it's all open. You can go and watch the whole proceedings of the event yourself. It's all publicly available online, and it's transparent. And usually, if you're orchestrating a worldwide conspiracy, you don't want your plans laid out on the table for everyone to see. That's why I'm not sure what that's indicative of.
They were making it obvious to people who are aware. I mean, the BBC aren't reporting on Event 201. The New York Times didn't report on it. CNN didn't report on it. So the blind who read the mainstream media and don't get any other information, they don't know anything about it, do they? The people who bother to do any research.
Ian, we are out of time. I'm sad to say we've got to go. The exit music's ramping up. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
For those listening, Ian Schilling, geopolitical analyst, researcher, and blogger. Check his website out at ian56.blogspot.com. We're closing out this hour. We'll be back on the other side in just a minute with headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system. Your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your T-cell political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
I just had to jump on the immune response thing. You know what I'm doing there, Jamarl.
No, you're good. You're good. I like that. I like it. It was like no pun intended. No pun intended. All right, so let's get to the headlines. In the news, Attorney General William Barr told federal prosecutors on Monday that they were allowed to investigate, quote, specific allegations, unquote, of voter fraud before the result of the presidential race is certified, while warning that specious, speculative, fanciful, or far-fetched claims should not be a basis for inflating or initiating federal inquiries. This follows a barrage of attacks on the validity of the election process by President Trump over the past week. The Justice Department's top election crimes prosecutor, Richard Pilger, resigned Monday following the announcement, telling colleagues in an email that the Attorney General was issuing an important new policy abrogating the 40-year non-interference policy for ballot fraud investigations in the period prior to elections becoming certified and uncontested. According to the New York Times, the Justice Department officials said that Mr. Barr had authorized scrutiny of allegations about ineligible voters in Nevada and backdated mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. The official also said that Barr did not write the memo at the direction of Trump, the White House, or Republican lawmakers. You know what, Shane, for 4 years, 4 years, they have told us that the presidential election in 2016 was stolen by the Russians. They told us that all of these conspiracy theories involving stolen discs and a P-tape and all of this other stuff made it for Donald Trump, president of the United States, to be like an animatronic robot of the Russian government. Now, one claim after the next was shot down. But they had one investigation after the next. They had Mueller looking into the president and everything dealing with the presidential affairs going back for like a year or two. Any claim that came up for Trump, they thought it was perfectly okay to investigate. Now, the president of the United States feels dodgy about the election, whether he has legitimacy to do so or not, Whether this is a specious claim or not, the President of the United States says he wants a recount. He should get his recount. He's the President of the United States. And in the same way that all of these investigations were done on him, I think it's a small bar, no pun intended, to ask for a recheck of the numbers. I don't think that's beyond the pale at all. I do think it's beyond the pale if it's, you get your check and you're still going over and over and over again, still trying to count stuff that doesn't exist, that type of stuff, then yeah, that's beyond the pale. But I don't see anything wrong with the president getting a recount. I don't see anything wrong with the president expending his court stuff, even if the cases are frivolous. If they are, hopefully they're thrown out. But considering what they did to Trump, this seems like a low ask. Am I insane on this? I mean, what am I missing?
I don't know. Here's the thing. One thing I just want to point out here. Yesterday, you were saying this might be the Republicans' Russiagate. I don't see that happening, frankly, because this is not nearly as sexy a story as Russiagate. It's hard to get people's emotions riled up over the course of months or years about election fraud, like in a deep, visceral way. I mean, people are pissed. And, if there was election fraud, it's an open question, then they have a right to be. So I'm not saying that, emotions aren't unwarranted here, but it's not Stormy Daniels. Let's put it that way. It's not the Steele dossier. It's not anonymous leaks from intelligence agencies over the course of, month after month after month, the constant barrage of this stuff. I don't see that happening. Yeah. So if the Republicans are going to have their Russiagate, which is, a questionable proposition in general, I'm not sure that it certainly wouldn't be good for the country for them to have a constant hammer campaign against the Democrats in the same way that it wasn't good for the country for the Democrats to have a constant hammer campaign against the Republicans. If they're going to have that, though, I don't think this is going to be it.
You don't think this is enough for it? Like, basically, if Trump gets his investigations, his lawsuits, and all this stuff comes out bupkis, then, I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully you're right. I don't want this to turn into a Russiagate. I hate it, Russiagate. So we'll see.
If it does, history would repeat itself in exactly the opposite direction of what most people expect. The first time as a farce, the second time as a tragedy, where Russiagate as a farce, this time potentially a real tragedy if this thing actually was stolen. Anyway, I don't think that's the case, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think this is stolen. But yeah, Trump will get his day in court. On Monday, President Donald Trump announced on Twitter that he'd fired Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and that Christopher Miller, who serves as Director of National Counterintelligence Center, will become acting secretary effective immediately. Mr. Miller, 55, is a former Army Green Beret who fought in Afghanistan. He also previously served as top counterterrorism policy official in the National Security Council in the Trump White House. After that job, he briefly served in top counterterrorism policy role at the Pentagon this year. Esper broke with Trump earlier this year on whether or not to deploy active duty troops in U.S. cities. Since then, he has shied away from the public's attention, speaking in pre-recorded clips and to familiar audiences and traveling often. At least 745 new COVID-19 deaths and 130,553 new cases were reported in the United States on November 9th, yesterday. Over the past week, there's been an average of 116,448 cases per day, an increase of 64% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of Tuesday morning, more than 10,191,200 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and at least 238,700 have died, according to the New York Times database. On Monday, Armenian President Nikol Pashinyan signed onto a Russian-brokered settlement to end the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, withdrawing its troops from the Nagorno-Karabakh region to be replaced by approximately 2,000 Russian peacekeepers. In a statement, Pashinyan wrote, "I personally made a very hard decision for me and all of us. It's not a victory, but there is no defeat." Russian President Vladimir Putin said the new agreement requires both the Armenian and Azerbaijani armies to stop at their current occupied positions. Also on Monday, Azerbaijan's foreign minister apologized for shooting down a Russian military helicopter, an action it said was accidental. Along with withdrawing its army, Armenia agreed to surrender the control of small ethnic Armenian areas inside Azerbaijan, but not in Nagorno-Karabakh, to open a transport corridor for Azerbaijan through Armenia to the Azerbaijani enclave in Nakhchivan, and to let the United Nations oversee the return of internationally or internally displaced people. The Russian peacekeepers would deploy for 5 years and also guard the access road over the mountain pass known as Lachin Corridor and an approximately 3-mile buffer zone along its length, according to the agreement, underscoring the loss of Susha or Sushi, depending upon whether you're Azerbaijani or Armenian. The agreement calls for the new section of the access roads to be built around the now Azerbaijani-controlled town, a dramatic loss for the ethnic Armenian cause in Nagorno-Karabakh. This is reportedly a relatively calm in the region. There's reportedly relative calm in the region. There's a clip of this, of Putin talking about the deal itself. And look, it's a big deal. This had the potential to get very bad and very ugly. And Azerbaijan was able to win back territory in a decisive fashion and force a concession. And Russia was there to broker this deal. Let's hear Putin talk about this. Let's play the clip.
Internally displaced persons and refugees return to the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh and adjacent areas under control of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. The exchange of prisoners of war, other held persons, and bodies of the dead is carried out. Economic and transport ties in the region are unlocked. The control of transport connections is carried out with the assistance of the Border Service of Russia, among others. We proceed from the premise that the reached agreements will create conditions for a long-term and full-length solution to the crisis around Nagorno-Karabakh on a fair basis and in the interests of Armenian and Azerbaijani people.
Now, the catch here is that the moment that you get a material advantage, and they were able to press that material advantage. Now, if you are Azerbaijan and you know, or at the very least you strongly suspect, that Armenia is not going to get help in this region, meaning Armenia has to deal with this on their own, whereas Turkey brazenly was basically openly assisting Azerbaijan in this conflict, basically destabilizing it and creating an imbalance of power. Well, it's hard to get somebody to come to the bargaining table if they believe they have an advantage, especially if they believe that advantage is decisive. And in this case, they press their advantage. The question becomes, is this it? Meaning, is this the long-term settlement where the hostilities go down? Shane, I was watching the parliament in Armenia where they basically raided the parliament. They beat the speaker to within an inch of his life. Like I said, the prime minister wouldn't have done this if he didn't believe he had to. And clearly by the response of the public itself, meaning leaders don't like to lose, nor do they like to look weak. And often it's the last resort for him to have to do something like this. So I honestly do hope, though, that the Russian peacekeepers are able to keep peace in the region. And I hope this is a new norm, let's say it that way, in regards to these guys being able to come together in some way.
Same. Yeah. Yeah, just to be clear, that you said they raided, you're talking about protesters there. Protesters raided the parliaments in Armenia.
No, protesters.
Following the announcement.
Yeah, when following the announcement, they broke through parliament. I mean, it was astonishing to watch. I mean, apparently they caught the Speaker of the House. They beat him brutally. They were not accepting this. What's wild to me is the passions that are raised over this territory and how attached. Like Azerbaijan had it in their heads, this is ours. You're on our land. We want you to move. Whereas Armenia, in their heads, this is a war of independence. Like, these are 2 points of view that just can't coincide. Like, something had to give. And so hopefully, these guys, we have to get Sloboda on to discuss this, because this is a major development.
We will. He's coming on in 1 minute.
Yeah. It's a major development.
Right. Right in a minute here, yeah.
Right. He's coming on 1 minute. All right. 3 men on trial in Spain for helping the perpetrators of a double jihadist attack in 2017 in Barcelona and a nearby seaside town that killed 16 people. The Islamic State claimed responsibility for the double attack, which also wounded 140 people on August 17th and 18th in Barcelona and Cambril, a resort 100 kilometers to the south. Although prosecutors have not charged any of the men with direct responsibility for the bloodshed, they are being charged with helping the attackers, one of whom rammed a van into a pedestrian on Barcelona's Las Ramblas Boulevard, leaving 14 dead, among them 2 children aged 3 and 7. 7 hours later, 5 of the driver's accomplices staged a second attack in Cambrils, ramming pedestrians and stabbing a woman who died of her injuries. All 5 were shot dead by police. The Taliban on Tuesday called on the incoming administration of the United States President-elect Joe Biden to stick to the February agreement from this year to withdraw U.S. troops. The United States has been pulling out troops under the deal, which foresees a complete withdrawal by May, subject to certain security guarantees, while the Taliban continues to hold peace talks with the Afghan government in Doha. The group said in a statement that Islamic Emirati would like to stress to the new American president-elect and future administrations that the implementation of the agreement is the most reasonable and effective tool for ending the conflict between both of our countries. President Donald Trump has made ending the war in Afghanistan a major campaign promise, saying in a tweet in October that troops could be out in Afghanistan by Christmas. I really suggest people to check out the Washington Post's Afghan Files. They are an astonishing indictment of what the United States has been doing in Afghanistan all of these years, the boondoggle money that we've been dropping into that country with 0 results, at the very least from a standpoint of the positive. That was not a war we won, despite the fact that all of these people kept saying, keep the course, we're almost there. There's a recounting of Leon Panetta, nearly getting killed by a suicide bomber, still coming out telling people that we're making progress. Yes. I'm going to end this here. So those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's go into a break. We have Mark Sloboda coming up, and we're going to be talking about Nagorno-Karabakh a little bit more in depth. That should be an amazing conversation. So you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to cash them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Mark Sloboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. Mark, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm alive. Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Glad to have you, and always an honor and a pleasure to have you. All right, Nagorno-Karabakh, the conflict, at least for now, appears to be over. This is thanks to a Russian deal brokered yesterday between Armenia and Azerbaijan. All parties have signed on, and as far as I can tell, conflict has ceased. Hostilities have eased, at least physically. People aren't killing each other right now. This is after Azerbaijan reportedly took at least a large swath of the city of Shusha, or Shushi, variously pronounced. Can you give us an overview? It's been a little bit over a week since we last had you on, but we wanted to get you back on to talk about this. What's happened? Why did this happen now? And what's the situation there on the ground as far as you can tell, Mark?
Okay, so this ceasefire seems to be holding for now. and it envisaged and supposedly the leaders of both Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as the leader of the Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh Armenian enclave in Azerbaijan, have agreed to and supposedly signed this deal with Russia as the guarantor, and Turkey kind of edging its way into a bit of influence as well. It came about pretty dramatically after a Russian military transport helicopter was shot down by a surface-to-air missile by Azerbaijani forces over Armenian airspace on the border with Azerbaijan. And this didn't actually happen in the region of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. It actually happened near the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic, which is a small extraterritorial chunk of Azerbaijan on the far side of Armenia, kind of nestled in against Turkey there. And there was a flurry of diplomacy, and it seems that Russia kind of put its foot down at this point, and within hours, both sides had agreed to this deal. It also came as the Artsakh Armenian forces in Nagorno-Karabakh were crumbling and had evidently completely lost to the city of Shusha or Shushi, depending on which side you want to call it, which is extremely important because it's on the strategic corridor, the Lachin corridor, that provides a linkage along a high mountain road between Armenia proper and Nagorno-Karabakh. It's really the main way, the only real way to get in and out of Nagorno-Karabakh. And with Azerbaijan seizing this, first of all, it's a very strategic along that route. And second of all, it's a big political victory for Ilham Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, because this city is regarded by Azerbaijanis as the heart, the cultural and historical heart of Azerbaijani Karabakh. So there was some political room after the taking of this city in Azerbaijan for Aliyev to maneuver and basically bring the hostilities to a close on terms that vastly favored Azerbaijan. And Russia kind of put its foot down, and this was the point. It saved the rest of Nagorno-Karabakh from complete military takeover and likely ethnic cleansing that has occurred in other areas of Nagorno-Karabakh thus far. The terms of the deal are extremely advantageous to Azerbaijan, much like the terms of the deal were extremely advantageous to Armenia back in 1994 with the Russian broken ceasefire that ended the conflict then and created the frozen conflict that lasted up until just a couple months ago. It seems amazing now. So basically, Armenia will have to return all of the 7 occupied territories of Azerbaijan surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh, except for a small 5-kilometer wide Lachin corridor, and they'll actually have to build a new road to go around Shushi to get to the Karabakh capital of Stepanakert. And that will be patrolled by Russian peacekeepers. 1,960 Russian peacekeepers will arrive. They were landing within hours of the deal being signed last night, and along with a large number of APCs and other military equipment that will help them guarantee. Nagorno-Karabakh, the parts of it that were taken by Azerbaijan, including the city of Shusha, will be held by Azerbaijan. That's over. They get what they've taken back at this point. Armenia also had to agree to the creation of a transport corridor across Armenia, linking this autonomous extraterritorial chunk of Azerbaijan, Nakhchivan, right up against Turkey, through Armenia, into Azerbaijan, and a new road will have to be built there. And basically what this does, this is Turkey's big victory here. It creates a road right from Turkey through this autonomous region, all the way through Armenia up into Azerbaijan. Linking the
Baku,
two.
right?
Yes, right up to Baku.
Into the Caspian Sea, creating basically a trade corridor, an economic corridor for Turkey.
Exactly. So it's a big win for Turkey. Turkey will also supposedly play a role in an observation center for the Russian peacekeeping force. Turkey and Azerbaijan are trumpeting this as Turkish peacekeepers will be involved. That's not really true. This is kind of a face-saving measure tossed to Erdogan with this bit. They'll be only allowed at this peacekeeping center, and it will most likely be on Azerbaijani territory, not in Nagorno-Karabakh. The details of that exactly have to be worked out. But this deal is obviously extremely favorable to Azerbaijan. Aliyev was celebrating and had harsh words for the leader of Armenia, Pashinyan, at the end of the signing, saying, "Where are your words now?" Referring to inflammatory statements that Pashinyan had made a few months before the start of this conflict about Karabakh being part of Armenia, which was seen as a political escalation by Azerbaijan and may have helped instigate this conflict. And in Armenia, there is now political chaos, as right after the announcement was agreed to, protesters poured into the streets of Armenia, furious at this deal, which they view as a surrender. And they stormed government buildings. They stormed the parliament. The speaker of the parliament was caught by the protesters and beaten and had to be hospitalized. And I haven't heard anything about where Pashinyan is at the moment. It seems like he's practically in hiding from his own people in shame over having to agree to the terms of this treaty. He announced it over Facebook. And he said it was extremely painful for him. All of the opposition parties of Armenia have signed a declaration demanding that Pashinyan resign and step down as prime minister for this entire fiasco.
This is astonishing. I mean, like, when they took Susha yesterday, and, it's like you're watching all of this take place. These guys have been going back and forth in this kind of seemingly, it seems like Azerbaijan was making gains, but it was unclear how many gains. And then you see this, dramatic in a way that finalizes things, meaning it becomes almost like a decisive win. The prime minister, Pashinyan, like you said, he's in hiding. And, when this was being reported last night, he was nowhere to be found. Like they found the speaker, but he was AWOL. What do you think is going to happen from here on out? Like you said, there's chaos from the standpoint of the political climate. He's most likely going to be deposed. The new person who comes in, that's assuming a new person gets in. If they're part of the opposition, what are they going to do that Pashinyan couldn't? I mean, ultimately, this is a thing of dealing with decisive force from the standpoint of Turkey and Azerbaijan forces working together, or Azerbaijani forces working together, that just overwhelmed Armenia. So even if an opposition party gets in, what is the opposition party going to do? I mean, this deal is already signed at this point.
Yeah, the Armenian has said that he doesn't agree that the deal stands unless there's consensus in Armenia to this capitulation, basically. It's unclear exactly politically what's going to happen now. I think because Russia is overseeing this and already deploying, and it seems that Karabakh would almost certainly be completely overrun very quickly. I mean, we're talking a complete collapse of the Armenian forces in Karabakh, Artsakh. The leader of Nagorno-Karabakh, Araik Harutyunyan, made a statement saying that a combination of coronavirus, an outbreak of dysentery, the overwhelming military impact of Turkish drones on the conflict, and a number of other things just led to the complete collapse of Armenian forces at this point. And Pashinyan came to power in Armenia at the head of street protests in a contested election 2 years ago. And he was widely seen as promoting a new foreign policy for Armenia, which is a small landlocked country, almost completely surrounded by enemies, except for a small border with Iran and a border with Georgia, which has more firmly allied itself with the United States. Armenia is effectively physically separated from Russia, which is its security ally and its biggest trade partner. Pashinyan came to power at the head of these protests, completely removed the previous government, and started prosecuting a lot of them against the express wishes of Russia, of Putin in particular, who had a good working relationship with the people that had preceded him. And a lot of these protests, I mean, they were carrying signs that protesters that were involved in seeing Pashinyan to power were carrying signs with saying things like "end the Russian occupation." There is still a Russian military base in Armenia up against the border with Turkey in the south, which is seen as kind of a guarantor of Armenia's security from Turkey, from Erdogan. But Russia made it clear that their security alliance didn't extend to what is, under international law at least, Azerbaijani territory in Azerbaijan, whether that's Nagorno-Karabakh or the occupied territories. And a lot of people are reading that Russia had as much of a hands-off role in this, establishing this neutral position as it did, not just because it also has good relations with Azerbaijan, but as a kind of slap against Pashinyan and the political forces that brought him to power into Armenia, reminding them that their existence wedged between Turkey and Azerbaijan depends almost entirely on Russia, and the West can't do anything to stop it. And this new deal provides a little bit of space for Turkey, but it preserves Russia's influence in the Caucasus. Russian troops and the border patrol will be extended through both countries, several thousand. It's hard to see this as anything but Russia extending its influence.
Absolutely, especially Mark, we're out of time, especially in comparison with Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo unsuccessfully attempting to broker a ceasefire, Russia trying twice unsuccessfully and now apparently succeeding. We've got to bring you back on some other time in a couple of weeks after some of the dust has settled to look at where this conflict has gone, not in the past, but where it could go in the future, potential diplomatic realignment in the region. In any event, Mark, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
For those listening, Mark Sloboda is an international relations and security analyst. You can follow him on Twitter at Mark Sloboda1. That's the number 1. And you can find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars. Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate. No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary. I see what you did there. Yep. Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320. And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest for this segment and the next, Leo Flores. He's a political analyst and Latin America campaign coordinator at Code Pink. Leo, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back on.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. Biden, by all accounts, has won. Biden is now the president-elect of the United States. We were talking, I believe, over the last couple of segments we had you on. Actually, last time we had you on, we had a fantastic conversation about the history of American intervention in Latin America and the history of just a lot of these issues. I'm curious, where do you think we're going to go with Biden as president, the United States, I mean, in our relations with Venezuela, with Bolivia, under Trump, a couple of coups, a couple of attempted coups? How do you think Biden would change that? What do you think he would do as president?
Well, I think the serious concern here is that given the Obama administration's record in Latin America, that Biden is really going to go back towards more of the same. So when we talk about coups in Latin America, we have to look at the coup in Honduras 2009. That the Obama administration played a key role in kind of cementing the coup, because they prevented the president of Honduras, Manuel Zelaya, from returning to the country, and they basically insisted on new elections without Zelaya. So if Biden really kind of takes this role of active interventionism that he had as vice president during the Obama era, then it's going to be bad news for Latin America. That said, I think there's something really interesting that happened in the elections here, and it's that Biden was able to win the presidency without winning Florida. And in addition to that, there are two congresswomen in South Florida who lost their seats, Donna Shalala, Debbie McCarson-Powell, both of them Democrats. So that to me indicates that the Biden administration really has this kind of opportunity to be less beholden to the Cuba and Venezuela lobbies in South Florida than any administration prior to his. So I think, while I'm extremely skeptical in very general terms about what Biden's going to mean for Latin America, I think there is a ray of hope that maybe things will be different, because the Cuba lobby might have significantly less influence on a Biden administration.
That's interesting. The Obama administration put Venezuela on state terror lists, or not state terror, but said that, it was a national security risk. Like you said, Honduras, Obama administration escorting the president out in his pajamas, but claiming that it's not a coup. And like you said, preventing the person from coming back, Zelaya from coming back. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is the foreign policy, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, it still may end up being belligerent in these other countries. Maybe not as over the top as Donald Trump, in the way, backing Juan Guaido and pretending a guy who didn't win in a pie shop was somehow the president of a country is jumping the shark, to put it mildly. So I feel you on that in regards to Biden's policy in regards to Latin America. I think the problem is that Biden really didn't talk about this stuff. And this was, like I said, nobody really had any demands of Joe Biden. And so Joe Biden comes in as somewhat of an unclear quantity in regards to what he's going to do foreign policy. Even Iran, it's not even clear that Joe Biden is going to go back to the JCPOA, despite the fact that Joe Biden supposedly helped negotiate the JCPOA, if you listen to Joe Biden. So, I'm kind of in the dark on what a Joe Biden presidency is. What do you have in your head in regards to what's coming up, meeting from the standpoint of what Joe Biden is going to try to accomplish in that office?
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point, is that Biden really didn't present what his foreign policy would be, not just towards Latin America, but in general. He just presented himself as not Trump, as someone who could allegedly heal the country. But the one exception is in Florida, he presented himself not as not Trump, but as more Trumpian than Trump. He tried to out-Trump Trump in the sense that he basically doubled down on Trump's strategy regarding Venezuela. Like, Joe Biden recognizes Juan Guaido. He basically said he had this campaign event, or rather his campaign had an event in August an online event where they discussed their Venezuela strategy. And it was basically indistinguishable from the Trump strategy in that he said he's going to try to form this international coalition for regime change in Venezuela. He said that he's going to continue to impose sanctions. The only difference really on the Venezuela front between Biden and Trump is that Biden wants to give TPS to Venezuela. And so, yeah, you're right in the sense that Biden really hasn't offered much. And really, we also have to go back and say that the fact that Trump didn't recognize the 2018 presidential elections in Venezuela, it harkens back to 2013, which was the first time the U.S. didn't recognize presidential elections in Venezuela. That was during the Obama administration, of course. In that instance, they didn't recognize someone else. They just kind of like let it go and continued dealing with the Venezuelan government, although they said that they would not recognize the election. Trump took that strategy to the next level in kind of appointing this nobody to be the so-called president of Venezuela. That experiment, of course, has failed. But really what we see with Biden in terms of his history in Latin America, during the Obama era, he was the brains behind what's known as CARSI and CIBSI and the Alliance for Prosperity. CARSI is the Central American Regional Security Initiative, CIBSI, the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. These were ostensibly to prevent Venezuelan influence in the region. That was kind of the theory behind these two kind of initiatives. But really, it was more about security, about stopping the flow of drugs, and about militarizing police forces throughout the region in a very kind of similar dynamic to what we've seen here in the United States over the past 20 years. And these programs are utter failures in that, A, the flow of drugs north from South America has not stopped and it's only increased. And B, migration increased as well. And I mean, the whole apparatus built by the Obama administration of DHS and ICE and all that was used, of course, by the Trump administration in awful ways. But we can't forget that it was actually, it was Obama that was implementing these horrible policies initially. Then when CARSI and CIBSI failed, they switched to what's known as the Alliance for Prosperity for Central America, which was this $750 million plan authorized by Congress, ostensibly to stop migration, but really it was basically a neoliberal paradise in the sense that there were massive giveaways to corporations to foment foreign investment in the region, and again, more security and more military investment. And so that has created a disaster in Central America, particularly Honduras after the coup. And so that's one of the reasons I'm so skeptical that Biden's actually going to do anything good.
Leo, talking about Honduras after the coup, one of the interesting things was Bolivia. When Honduras after the coup, it turned into a basket case. I mean, basically the place was set on fire. And, it's funny, the United States always complains about immigration. Oh, we need to stop these immigrants. And even creating policies to try to make it inhospitable with the notion that we're going to deter people from coming here by making it horrible. Missing the fact that we were messing around in those countries, like in large part. Some of the damage that many of those countries have came from our intervention, either paying drug squads or kill squads back during the old Reagan era, or these NGOs that have taken over the jobs of many of these places now. Not to mention, like you said, the coups in Venezuela or the attempted coups in Venezuela. But Bolivia was interesting to me. Evo wins by 10 points. Clear win, like an astonishing win. And it's a win that we've never even seen, like in the U.S. from that scale. Like we would be shocked if Obama had beat McCain by like 10 points. Like it just would be unheard of from the standpoint of our modern elections. And yet Evo wins it by that majority of a margin. He gets taken out in a coup. He flees to Mexico, and he doesn't entirely fight in the sense of starting a civil war because he was very concerned. He said, I'm not going to engage in this. And he allows the coup mongers to hold power for a year, at which point they were kicked out. MAS was brought back in. Evo, yesterday, crossed back into Bolivia. Can you give us what is going on politically in Bolivia right now, especially regarding the people who were instrumental in that coup the first time around, and especially from the crimes that were committed, the people that were injured, the people who were beaten, killed? what is going to take place from the new incoming government in response to the coup the year prior?
Who's now the leader of the MAS party, the movement towards socialism. And then, as he's just said, Abel came back to huge crowds of people who greeted him at the border and then followed him and are continuing to follow him as he rides in a caravan across the country. Abel remains wildly popular. I think there are still some sectors of the population within that support the MAS party who are a bit upset at the fact that Abel left in the first place, and also at the fact that they failed to mobilize social movements in time to stop the coup because, as you said, Evo Morales was kind of very scared of the atrocities that might happen and of a possible civil war. But these same social movements then came out in the hundreds of thousands in July and August of this year to demand elections. And it's because of this kind of people's power on the street that the Añez coup regime was, forced to set a date for the election. And in these new elections, the MAS won by 26 points instead of the 11 points that Abel had won with in 2019. So what we saw in the elections was a huge rejection of the coup regime, a rejection of the neoliberal party that was, came in second place, and a rejection of the fascist party that came in third place. And so, what we're going to see in the future right now for Bolivia, it's going to be tough for the incoming government because the coup regime has left it in debt, has cratered the economy, and has responded to COVID very poorly. I think the response improved maybe in the last couple of months, but initially Bolivia was one of the hotspots in South America. And also, of course, you have this coup regime led by Añez and Interior Minister Murillo and the Defense Minister, who are responsible for human rights atrocities as documented, for example, by the Harvard Law School's International Human Rights Clinic. They wrote this amazing report that was published I think in July of this past summer, documented all the abuses, which they called systematic. And so what we're seeing, what we're going to see really is kind of a clamor for justice from below. I think the incoming government said that they don't want vengeance. They don't want to engage in retribution, but they will certainly have to do something to appease all the victims and the family members of the victims, and really the Bolivian population at large that suffered tremendously over these 11 months of the coup regime. I think we are going to see eventually these people, Añez and her cronies, be indicted. If not, then we'll certainly see civil lawsuits.
Leo, let's take a break because I apologize for interrupting you, but we need to take a break. I agree with you. Something has to happen. I mean, it just from the standpoint of not allowing this to take place again in the future. Totally agree. You guys are listening to the voice of Leo Flores, political analyst and Latin America campaign coordinator at Code Pink. This is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined by Leo Flores, our guest for this segment, political analyst and Latin America campaign coordinator at Code Pink. Leo, we're talking about Latin America broadly. The United States, for over a century now, has dominated the region economically, politically, diplomatically. That's that domination. There's a pithy phrase for it, the Monroe Doctrine. That's been our policy. It seems to me, and please correct me where I go wrong here, it seems to me that we're able to do that simply because there are no other great powers in the region. There are no, unlike the Soviet Union, for instance, one-time power, unlike the United Kingdom, at different points. Unlike other larger countries, for instance, Germany in the European Union, even China at this point, there aren't those. I'm stumbling a little bit here, but we're going up against, for instance, Brazil potentially. We're going up against somewhat more moderate countries, which have only within the last couple of decades really started to take the fore internationally. Do you see that changing? Am I right in that being the sort of boundary condition that lets us enact those kinds of policies? And if I'm right, when do you think that's going to stop? What do you think is going to prevent that from happening in the long run, Leo?
Balance to the U.S. There's no other regional power. But I think there is hope, because when we saw the pink tide was a period early 2000s when you had leftist government after leftist government being elected throughout South America and Latin America, the Caribbean, particularly Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela. When you had those three governments working together, that served as somewhat of a counterbalance to the U.S. And it helped, for example, stop the FTAA, the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas, which would have been a NAFTA style agreement, North American Free Trade Agreement, that would have basically been a huge giveaway to corporations, that would have, harmed workers throughout the hemisphere. But these three countries were able to combine and join forces and put a stop to that. And that was a huge check on U.S. geopolitical ambitions in the region. And so in order for, Latin America to really escape from the imperial thumb of the United States, they're going to have to build up institutions that serve as a counterbalance to the U.S. And that began to happen over the past 20 years with, say, the creation of UNASUR, which is the Union of South American Nations, which is kind of like, I think the thought process behind the creation of that was to have an EU-type body. It was still in its infancy, but by now it's already been kind of decimated, mostly by the Trump administration, but also the Obama administration is critical because they were very instrumental in the coup against Dilma Rousseff and again in the imprisonment of former President Lula da Silva through the U.S. support for Operation Car Wash, which was this kind of corruption investigation that basically went out of hand and started targeting politicians who were deemed adversarial to the U.S. And so if Latin America begins working on these institutions once more, and I think Bolivia is a really good example here because they've said that they really want to focus on rebuilding UNASUR, then that can serve as the counterbalance. Otherwise, I don't think, we're entering the possibility of a new Cold War with China, but China is really far from Latin America, and I don't think it'll be sufficient counterweight to the U.S. in the region. So it's going to have to be the region itself coming together and insisting on its independence and finding kind of strength through unity. And I think one of the proposals that's come from the global South over the past 20 years is this idea of a multipolar world, rather than just having the one superpower of the U.S. or previously during the Cold War of the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The idea was to have many regional powers to serve as a counterbalance to each other. The best example is the BRICS, being Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. But of course, as you have in Brazil, when you went from this left-wing government of Lula and Rousseff to a very fascistic government of Jair Bolsonaro, kind of the BRICS project fell apart, and the U.S. was able to once again fill in that void and have a lot of control over South America. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's the lack of a balancing power in the region that has led the U.S. to have such control.
If the countries were able to stand together in a certain solidarity, I agree with you. If you think of Correa, for example, in Ecuador, he had a very clear understanding of this notion of sovereignty or nation sovereignty from a standpoint of Ecuador not wanting to be under imperialist powers and stuff like that. Very clear. Moreno, not so much, and was able to give over the farm in a heartbeat. And when you look at the other governments, you find that leaders were being replaced either by hook or by crook by right-wingers. So like Bolsonaro is another good example of this. What is the political climate in Brazil right now? Basically you have all of these people to die. Brazil is almost catching up with the U.S. in regards to the number of deaths. It's obscene in regards to the number of people that have died under Bolsonaro. And it doesn't necessarily seem like they're doing anything about it in real terms. The politics of this. Lula is out of prison. Rousseff You mentioned that they took her out, but while they were taking her out, you had a bunch of other people under the car wash thing that had indictments or had charges hanging over their head as they called her corrupt to get her removed. It was astonishing. And basically, this coup ended up with Bolsonaro being able to take power. Is there a political opposition to Bolsonaro right now? I would imagine it has to be. And if so, what does that look like in Brazil?
Yeah, I mean, it's looking like in the next presidential election that Lula will be the candidate. He's free of all charges now, and he should be able to run. He remains wildly popular, but at this moment, this very second, it's an interesting dynamic is happening in Brazil because Bolsonaro, who ran against Lula and Dilma's plans to basically give cash to poor people and to have all these social services and so really fund them. Now Bolsonaro is giving cash to poor people, and his popularity has shot up through the roof. So he's completely flipped on that particular point. But with the defeat of Trump, though, he made some really interesting comments a couple of days ago in which he suggested he might not even run for re-election. And so I think Trump's defeat has provided, has been a big blow towards Bolsonaro because Trump and the fact that the U.S. that Brazil was able to get so close to the U.S. during the Trump era really helped Bolsonaro, particularly among, the right wing and the capitalist class who might have been against Bolsonaro at first, because there was a similar dynamic going on in Brazil as there was to the U.S., where we had the right, part of the right at least, being very skeptical of Bolsonaro, particularly as he was a candidate, but then embracing him once he won. And so right now in Brazil, it's kind of a tricky situation because Bolsonaro is very popular, but I think once we get closer and closer to those elections in Brazil, that I think Lula is going to step up more and more, and he's still, beloved. And so I think eventually we're going to see a Bolsonaro loss, but we're still a couple of years away from that. So that might be a little, wishful thinking, perhaps.
I mean, it seems, Leo, thank you again for being with us. It seems, I just want to step back for a second to look at this in a broad sense. As far as I know, what the U.S. has done historically in Latin America is, on the one hand, you have these sort of neoliberal projects trying to open up free flows of investment so that companies based in the U.S. can make money by extracting resources and extracting the value of labor in these different countries. On the other hand, politically, we overthrow the leadership of different nations whose policies we don't like. We put in place our own people, basically, supporting local leaders, usually right-wing folks. And then when you bring these two together, it seems like there's this sort of gridlock that keeps individual countries from growing economically through the first neoliberal policy, and then from potentially unifying politically. You're talking about a potential coalition that could stand up to American influence. I can't help but think that both of these are intentional. Is that broadly accurate? Am I missing something there? What else would you throw into that, sort of cursory analysis, Leo?
That's how the U.S. manages to maintain control. And I think, it's very difficult for Latin America to break through from that trap. But in every country, almost every country in the region, you had periods where a leftist comes into power and enacts deep reforms. And then when the right wing comes, they try to undo those reforms, but they're not always super successful in undoing everything. So certainly, Latin America as a whole is better off now than it was, say, 100 years ago, when at the height of gunboat, what's known as gunboat diplomacy, which was basically the Monroe Doctrine on steroids, when the U.S. would just send their Marines to whatever country wasn't following the plan that the U.S. wanted, right? And so, you're right. And it sounds like a crazy conspiracy, but it's not. It's only kind of logical from this imperialist point of view of how do you control people and how do you, make sure that you have access to all the resources you need to keep your economy booming. And so unless we see a right wing in Latin America that really takes sovereignty seriously, that takes their own country's development seriously, then Latin America is going to continue to be underdeveloped because the elites, the ruling class, the oligarchs in these countries, they have very self-serving interests, and they don't mind at all selling out completely to the United States. And I think exhibit A of that right now is Juan Guaido and his cronies, who've been using all this money given to them by the United States to basically enrich themselves. So, for example, and I'll be real quick, there's the Simon Bolivar Foundation, which is the philanthropic wing of Citgo Petroleum, Citgo being a subsidiary of Venezuela's state-owned oil company. that money in that foundation used to go to help kids with cancer get bone marrow transplants. They would get transported from Venezuela to Italy where they would receive treatment. Since Guaido came into power and took over that foundation, none of those kids are getting sent treatments for cancer. And instead, that money is being literally given to the parties that support Juan Guaido in Venezuela. We're talking about millions of dollars going directly into the pockets of political parties instead of being given to kids who need cancer treatment.
That's astonishing. I mean, it's if Juan Guaido was anywhere else, he would have been shot as a traitor. And I mean that in the literal sense of the word traitor. Treasonous. I mean, to put it mildly, you're basically selling your country out for your own ambitions. I mean, calling for uprisings and all this other stuff. One last question on Bolivia before we go. We have about a minute left. Did they implement, from the standpoint of the Coup government, any policies that the new government coming in are stuck with? Like, did they sign any loan agreements? Did they sign any deals? Any of those things? And would those things be annulled with the new government? I mean, that's if it's possible.
She did. So they signed a $300 million loan agreement with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And they signed it without the consent of the Senate, which is necessary under Bolivian law. So right now, it's still unclear if the Bolivian government is going to be saddled that or if the IMF is going to recognize that it was an illegal loan to begin with. And I think that's going to go a long way towards determining how quickly the Bolivian economy is going to be able to recover from the disastrous policies of the Áñez government.
Leo, thank you for coming on to the show, man. I really appreciate it. You always give us really good information on South America. And so this is Leo Flores, political analyst and Latin America campaign coordinator at Code Pink. And of course, you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with headlines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time for our last hour this morning of the most disruptive show covering news and events in those states and around the world. In the Independent Corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Going straight into it, in the news this morning, well, yesterday, Attorney General William P. Barr told federal prosecutors that they were allowed to investigate specific allegations of voter fraud before the results of the presidential race are certified, while warning that, quote, specious, speculative, fanciful, or far-fetched claims should not be a basis for initiating federal inquiries, end quote. This follows a barrage of attacks on the validity of the election process by President Trump over the past week. The Justice Department's top election crimes prosecutor, Richard Pilger, resigned Monday following the announcement, telling colleagues in an email that the Attorney General was issuing, quote, an important new policy abrogating the 40-year-old non-interference policy for ballot fraud investigations in the period prior to elections becoming certified and uncontested, end quote. According to the New York Times, a Justice Department official said that Mr. Barr had authorized scrutiny of allegations about ineligible voters in Nevada and backdated mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. The official also said that Barr did not write the memo at the direction of Trump, the White House, or Republican lawmakers. Jamarl, do you think this has legs? Where do you think this is going to go in the next month or so? During the last months of President Trump's supposed last term, where do you think this is going to go?
You mean the lawsuits?
The DOJ investigation. Yeah,
the investigation. I have to be honest. I don't think they're going to go anywhere. I mean, I could be wrong. Trump is going to get his lawsuits, as he should. I mean, he's president of the United States. He should be able to, if anyone wants to contest it, look, for the longest time, I was one of those people who said, why don't you contest the election? Why don't you check the vote count? There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the election, right? I mean, you should want to know who wins the election. Now, I don't necessarily want just claims to be made just for the sake of the politics of it all. Meaning, I don't want to concede because I don't want to concede because I don't want to concede. I don't want that. If you lost, you lost. But personally, I have no issue with Trump checking the vote tally. None. Zero.
Yeah, I don't either. I think what a lot of people are, and this hasn't happened yet. We'll see if this comes to pass. In the same way that Republicans were frustrated with Democrats for keeping the voting going until they won, I think Democrats are going to be frustrated if Republicans try to keep the recounts going until they win. I don't think that's going to actually happen, but that's at least the chatter on the high level. I just want to note also, I've seen some people on the left calling what's happened in the past week from President Trump a coup, which is ridiculous to me on its face. That's not a coup. That's how democracy works. If your vote totals are really close and there's evidence, potential evidence even, of fraud, if you have a reason to believe that, then there's a room for movement there to investigate it. But I just want to note that is absolutely insane. One thing here, actually, we're actually having a conversation about whether or not the Republican establishment supports what Trump's doing here. We didn't throw this into headlines. McConnell has declined to congratulate Biden on his, as at least officially becoming the president-elect, and he's backed Trump, saying that he would, he does back the recount, he does back this investigation. So he hadn't done that when we were talking yesterday. He had sort of been holding back, waiting in the wings or whatever. At this point, he's come out and taken that step. Not that it's decisive, but it shows evidence of support, and that means that there actually might be a fighting chance. It's just whether politically there's enough momentum in the long run, all that.
Yeah, I see nothing wrong with. I mean, I was one of those people who thought Hillary Clinton should have checked the vote tally in Wisconsin. Like, if there are any abnormalities, what's the downside in checking it? Now, media will look at it and say, oh, you're trying to impugn the integrity of the elections. Or maybe we're trying to affirm the integrity of the elections by actually checking to make sure that the vote is what it is. Like, I don't buy into this stuff. I get that American presidents tend to just concede regardless. Like Al Gore concedes, John Kerry concedes. And there was weirdness in Ohio and Wisconsin in the vote tallies. Nevertheless, they still conceded. Trump, he says, no, I want to check the vote tally. I wanted those people to check the vote tally because I wanted to see if anything was dubious in the way that the tally was. Well, why wouldn't I think the same for Trump? I just don't buy this argument that this is the destruction of democracy. You have a lot of people out there who don't buy the election results. Those people need to be made clear, meaning it needs to be transparent. Some of those people are going to still say, we don't believe it, regardless of how much evidence you show them. But you're not trying to get those. You're trying to get the group of people who say, look, I have questions about this. I think this is somewhat dubious, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the president looking into it, meaning earnest inquiry. Do those people exist?
Well,
yes.
Also, the Democrats from 2016 on were trumpeting that the election of Trump was the destruction of democracy. Yeah. Literally with the Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness, all that stuff. It feels like a little bit of Shakespeare, thou doth protest too much. After 2016 and what the DNC did to Bernie, it seems like, you're trying to cover your guilt. You're trying to distract from your mistakes, your flaws, your transgressions, by pointing the finger at somebody else. And frankly, there's nobody there. There was a phantom that they were pointing at. Russiagate was not borne out, by basically any of the evidence. Anyway, we've got other headlines to do, but it's silly. It's silly, man. I know know where I'm coming from with this stuff. In any event,
I mean, you have to, because the fact of the matter is Donald Trump has taken this tack that it's all fraud, it's all cheating, and so many of his supporters will go along with that. In the same way that many of the Democratic supporters went along with Russiagate. They feel it. You know what I mean? It's a thought thing. It's a feeling thing. And any little bit of anomaly, they say, oh, there it is. Right there. There's evidence. There's evidence. You have some people on the left who hates Democrats and still come to a similar conclusion. I greatly dislike the Democratic Party, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm immediately going to say fraud any more than I did the Russiagate stuff. To me, my tenor is the same. We have more headlines, but I agree with you. I don't like this because this is not a coup. This is the president of the United States with questions.
We'll be talking about it. Here's the thing: we'll have plenty of time to talk about this in our next couple of segments, talking with Peter Lavelle and George Samueli. Anyway, On Monday, that's yesterday, President Donald Trump announced on Twitter that he fired Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and that Christopher Miller, who was serving as director of the National Counterterrorism Center, would become acting secretary, quote, effective immediately, end quote. Miller is a former Army Green Beret who fought in Afghanistan, longtime counterterrorism wonk dude. And Esper had broken with Trump earlier this year, by the way, setting the stage here on whether or not to deploy active duty troops to U.S. cities. Since that move, he has shied away from the public's attention, speaking primarily in pre-recorded clips and to familiar audiences, for instance, the Heritage Foundation, and traveling often overseas. To give a brief COVID update, at least 745 new coronavirus deaths and 130,553 new cases were reported in the U.S. on November 9th. Over the past week, there has been an average of 116,448 cases per day, an increase of 64% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of Tuesday morning, more than 10,191,000 people in the U.S. have been infected with COVID, and at least 238,700 have died. As we were talking about with Mark Sloboda earlier, the conflict in over Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan appears to be over, at least for now. On Monday, Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan signed onto a Russian-brokered settlement to end the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, withdrawing their troops, that's Armenia's troops, from the Nagorno-Karabakh region to be replaced by approximately 2,000 Russian peacekeepers. In a statement, Pashinyan wrote, "I personally made a very hard decision for me and all of us. It's not a victory, but there's no defeat." End quote. Well, what is it then? Anyway, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the new agreement requires both the Armenian, Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijani armies to stop at their currently occupied positions. Also on Monday, Azerbaijan's foreign ministry apologized for shooting down a Russian military helicopter, an action that it said was accidental, and that in combination with the apparently successful overtaking of Shusha, or Shushi as it's variously called by the Azerbaijanis and Armenians. Those two events seem to have precipitated this recent resolution of that conflict. Along with withdrawing its army, Armenia agreed to surrender its control of small ethnic Armenian areas inside Azerbaijan, but not in Nagorno-Karabakh, to open a transport corridor for Azerbaijan through Armenia to the Azerbaijani exclave of Nakhichevan, and to let the United Nations oversee the return of internally displaced people in the region. That middle one, by the way, is significant for Turkey, as we were talking about with Mark Sloboda. The corridor, the transport corridor from the Azerbaijani exclave of Nakhichevan through to mainland Azerbaijan, specifically to the seaport of Baku on the Caspian Sea. That basically gives Turkey, Azerbaijan's sort of chief ally in this conflict, it gives Turkey the ability to sell its goods, to buy goods along that economic corridor, along that trade corridor through the Caspian Sea to Central Asia, China, much of the rest of Asia, basically. The Russian peacekeepers will be deployed there for 5 years and also guard that access road over a mountain, also guard the access road over a mountain pass known as the Lachin corridor, and an approximately 3-mile wide buffer zone along that corridor's length. Underscoring the loss of Shusha or Shushi, the agreement calls for a new section of access road to be built around the now Azerbaijani-controlled town of Shusha or Shushi, a dramatic loss for the ethnic Armenian cause in Nagorno-Karabakh. There is reportedly now a relative calm in the region after about a month of bloodshed. So that's good. I'll just put it on the human level for the people living there. It's going to probably cause, if you're having to move, if you're having to deal with different people being in charge, that's its own problem. But at least people aren't dying now. I was reading Erasmus the other day for some reason. And there's this quote in there, I'm going to paraphrase, that an unjust that an unjust peace is better than a righteous war. I'm not sure I agree with that, but there's certainly some truth to it. I'm not sure that this peace is unjust, but peace is definitely better than war. I'll put it like that.
Depends.
In Spain, 3 men are on.
Well,
go ahead.
It depends. If it's peace in the absence of justice, like, Nazis pacify a particular area, it may be, okay, it's peaceful, but, it depends. It really does depend. I agree with your first comment. It depends.
It does depend. Yeah, I don't want to make too much out of it. Yeah. Mainly, I'm just talking about reading Erasmus. I'm just trying to show off a little bit there. I'm just kidding. Three men are on trial in Spain for helping the perpetrators of a double jihadist attack in 2017 in Barcelona and a nearby seaside town that killed 16 people. The Islamic State claimed responsibility for the double attack, which also wounded 140 people on August 17th and 18th in Barcelona and Cambrils. That's a resort 100 kilometers or 60 miles to the south of Barcelona. Although prosecutors have not charged any of the men with direct responsibility for the bloodshed, they are being charged with helping the attackers, one of whom rammed a van into pedestrians on Barcelona's Las Ramblas Boulevard, leaving 14 people dead, among them 2 children aged 3 and 7. Several hours later, 5 of the driver's accomplices staged a second attack in Cambrils, ramming pedestrians and stabbing a woman who died of her injuries. All 5 were shot dead by police. And again, 3 men who helped with those attacks, who assisted with them, are now being charged, are now on trial in Spain. The Taliban today called on the incoming administration of U.S. President-elect Joe Biden to stick to a February agreement from this year to withdraw U.S. troops. The United States has been pulling out troops under the deal, which foresees a complete withdrawal by May of 2021, subject to certain security guarantees, while the Taliban continues to hold peace talks with the Afghan government in Doha. The group said in a statement that, quote, the Islamic Emirate would like to stress to the new American president-elect and future administration that implementation of the agreement is the most reasonable and effective tool for ending the conflict between both our countries, end quote. President Donald Trump has made ending the war in Afghanistan a major campaign promise, saying in a tweet in October that troops could be out of Afghanistan by Christmas. We'll see if they actually are. That would be significantly earlier than the May departure that's planned. But there's not that much time left. Got a little bit over a month between, a month and a half between now and Christmas. And Trump has a lot on his plate. I'm not sure that that's actually going to happen. And of course, it wouldn't be the first time that he's dissembled. The world's first crewed Hyperloop trip was a success at Virgin Hyperloop's DevLoop facility. That's in Nevada. 2 passengers were fired through a 500-meter tube on Sunday evening. That's the transportation technology, the sort of vacuum tube transportation technology first introduced to the public's attention by Elon Musk, although I don't think he was the first to come up with the idea, but he certainly popularized it. Anyway, the company says it marks a new frontier in the development of the transportation technology. Company co-founder Josh Geigel and head of passenger experience Sarah Lukian were on board for the first run. In order to maintain a comfortable experience for acceleration and braking, the capsule's speed in this test was limited to 107 miles per hour. That's less than half of the pod's top speed in the tube, which maxed out at 240 miles per hour during tests at the end of 2017. That's mostly due to the length of the tube. 500 meters isn't long enough to reach the sort of speeds that the company promises in the long run. With longer sections of tubing, the tech will likely reach higher speeds when the second Hyperloop facility is built in West Virginia. And in my last headline here, Facebook has taken down a network of pages related to a Stop the Steal movement. That, of course, is a reference to the election, stopping the stealing of the election, at least the purported stealing. The 7 pages, which had more than 2 million followers in all, are reportedly linked to former Trump campaign head Steve Bannon. Facebook told the Washington Post that the pages used, quote, inauthentic behavior tactics, end quote. Again, as I said earlier, that sounds a little bit like tech speak gobbledygook to me, but I think I know what they mean. I think they're talking about pages basically pretending to be other pages. Earlier, we briefly mentioned one of the pages had changed its name from like Stop the Steal to like Gay Communists for Socialism or something like that. So they're doing weird internet tactics. I think that's what they're referring to. But again, I don't know exactly what inauthentic behavior tactics means. And frankly, I think very few people do, even in Facebook. In any event, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're going into a break, and we will be back in just a minute. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and myself, Shane Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession. that is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, you know. But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, that's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely...
No, George, right now. Just
People would never have believed this.
Hey, George.
I'm still trying to wrap my head.
Hi, we got you scheduled for the interview with Fault Lines. Let me patch you for our program, okay?
Sorry, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our two guests, the Gaggle guys, Peter Lavelle and George Samueli. Peter Lavelle is an American journalist and host of Crosstalk on RT, and George Samueli is a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute and author. And together, they are the hosts of Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle. That is airing now on YouTube. Hey guys, how are you doing this morning?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. We're trying something out here. I'll just start it out like this. At least officially, Biden is now the president-elect of the United States.
No, he's not.
There we go. We can get right into it. Peter, please take us away. What's your take on what's been going on?
Well, none of the votes have been certified. Okay. And then we have December 8th, the Safe Harbor Day. That's when the Electoral College electors convene. And I think on the 10th, they vote. So nothing has been settled. Nothing at all. Just because CNN and MSNBC says it's over doesn't mean it's over. Okay. They're the last two news outlets that I would trust on this. And this is part of their concerted effort to gaslight the public. This is not over.
Yes, I agree entirely with Peter. And this is something we've discussed a number of times on the Gaggle, which is that when the media call an election, that has no standing, no legal standing, no constitutional standing. There is a lengthy, complicated process that is prescribed by the U.S. Constitution to decide who the next president is. So it goes to the state legislatures. The state legislators have to certify the electors. Then it goes to the U.S. House of Representatives. They have to certify the electors. Then we have a president. But the idea that CNN or the other networks say, oh, Biden has topped the 270 mark, has no standing. And really what's behind this is an attempt to bully half the country into accepting an election outcome that is still being actively contested in the courts.
Yes, they're trying to set
last I checked, it was something like one third of Americans say they actually do not believe the results of the election. They believe that there was voter fraud. Approximately, I think it was half see Biden as potentially an illegitimate president-elect. I think technically the thing I should have said was presumptive president-elect, but again, that introduces some ambiguity because who exactly is doing the presuming? I mean, here's what it comes down to, frankly. Where do you think the obviously speculation on all of our parts, where do you think the allegations of voter fraud are going to go? Barr just announced the DOJ is doing investigations. He just introduced those investigations, but a couple of months between now and when Biden would be stepping in if he were to be the upcoming president, what do you think is actually going to happen there?
Well, I think we have to see those legal procedures that go through. This is not rocket science, you guys. It's not going to be very hard. If someone makes a claim about post-dating ballots or ballots coming from a trunk of a car, I mean, prove it, okay? Oh, I have pictures, I have video, I have a witness. It's not hard. I mean, the media makes it, this almost never happens. It happens a lot. American elections are quite corrupt, okay? And everybody knows it. See, the position that George and I have on the gaggle is that we're not trying to determine an outcome. We want to determine what happened. That's all.
Right. No, I think that's right. So at the moment, we have two different legal tracks. I mean, we have the Trump campaign that is filing lawsuits in a number of different states. They are charging a number of different serious irregularities and potential voter fraud. And then you have the bar, the Department of Justice investigation into serious voter fraud that is sufficiently grave as to affect the outcome. So at the moment, yes, it's going through the courts. We will see how compelling the Trump campaign's case is. We'll see what the Department of Justice will find. But this is a process that needs to go through, because this was a very, very unusual election. Basically, it's never happened that there was so many mail-in ballots, which everyone has always held to be ripe for fraud, because it's so easy to commit fraud when it comes to mail-in ballots. And yet this was widely practiced this time. To be fair, there have been many reports of voting irregularities and serious malfeasance. So, yeah, there's a process that needs to be gone through.
I agree with your position. As a flat fact, you're right. CNN has no legal power in their claims of who won the presidency. I mean, basically, they're making a projection on what they think is the most ideal outcome. I also agree with you that they're trying to set a narrative. In the sense of saying these claims are baseless, Joe Biden is the president-elect, and this is the president. Meaning, if you hear that over a few months, it's kind of like the Russiagate stuff. People will say, yeah, the Russians might have had something to do with it, despite the fact that the legal cases and everything else, it's just they've repeated it for 3 years. So, yeah, I agree with you that there's a certain setting of narrative. Totally. I also agree with you that there's nothing wrong with Trump going through his legal loopholes, meaning he's, going through the courts and so forth. But let's be honest. Is there any scenario that Trump would have lost this race and came out and conceded? I don't think there is. Like outside of a blowout, I don't think Trump would have ever conceded.
There's a remedy, and it's a very extreme remedy, but it has been already suggested, is that votes that are considered tainted will be taken off the board, okay? And this is the gist of it right here, is that if you look at the timing of the counting, I mean, remarkably on the Eastern Seaboard, about 2:40 in the morning, everybody stops counting, and then everyone stopped counting across the entire country. Why? Okay, and then you have a huge increase of vote for Biden. That may be true. That's fine. Can you explain to me how that happened? And if you can do that, then I will agree. The thing is that I think the conversation kind of misses the point. Is that because the political left, they no longer believe in democracy as a form of representation.
Wait,
all.
Peter. Just 70 million. Did you answer that? Is there a situation like I want you to go on, so I don't mean to interrupt to stop you, but I do want to answer to that. I mean, is there a situation that you believe Trump would have ever conceded?
Well, I think, I think if he would have been defeated in a landslide, as all of the polls were predicting, he would have conceded. He would have had no choice. I mean, what choice do you have if you lost in a landslide? If, however, it is a very, very close race, this race is exactly as close as 2016 was, and the Democrats refused to accept the 2016 outcome. This is just simply the mirror image of 2016. Yeah. Just as Trump won those three key industrial Midwestern states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, by a very narrow in 2016. He lost them by a very narrow margin in 2020. Yet the Democrats, for 4 years, refused to accept that outcome. And so now we're being told, not even 1 week has gone by since the election, that Trump had better accept this result and just shut up and go away. No, it doesn't work that way.
Well, actually, George, that's the way they want it to work, okay? Because they look at the electoral procedure, what we call democracy, is just a cudgel to get their ideology imprinted on the body politic. They don't care. They don't care about who voted for whom. They care about the outcome, and they have a presumptive outcome, and they will fix all the facts to determine that. If they had taken a different track, like say, okay, let's just go through all of these votes and see exactly what happened. There's a number of complaints. If they did that, they would have more legitimacy. But by gaslighting people, see, the example was made up about Russiagate and people getting used to it. It's not a good comparison because 70 million people actively voted for Donald Trump. They have a vested interest in this. They were proactive. Russiagate was a passive propaganda campaign shoved at the public. Voting for someone is a proactive one. And the more they say, you rubes and proles don't know what you're talking about, the more people are going to get their back up against the wall. This is a bad place to be.
Right. And it's very important to remember that when it came to Russiagate, the ingredients that made up Russiagate, not one shred of evidence was ever presented. When they talk about a couple of $100 worth of Facebook ads, and so the U.S. public was asked to accept that some Facebook ads could have swung the election, or the disclosures on WikiLeaks, which had nothing whatever to do with Russia. No evidence has ever been presented that it had anything to do with Russia. Just to say that the Russians affected the election. No, there's just simply no evidence for any of that, let alone the whole story of the Trump-Russia collusion. Yet for 4 years, the media aired these accusations all the time. Yet yesterday you had on Fox News, they simply cut off the streaming of a news conference by Katie McInerney, the Trump's press secretary, because they said, these allegations are unproven. And the Facebook ads allegations, they were proven. The GRU hacked the DNC, that's been proven. No. Yet the media, and including Fox News, aired these accusations for 4 years. So again, there's a blatant hypocrisy here.
We've got to go into a break, guys. Thank you for being with us. When we come back, I want to hear what you think. You just brought up Fox News. They, like you said, were throwing their weight in, not just with Russiagate, but they also seem to be throwing their weight in against Trump a little bit more than I would have expected. But maybe not if you've been paying attention to what they've been doing over recent years. In any event, we have to go into a break. We are joined now by Peter Lavelle and George Samueli. Peter Lavelle, American journalist and host of Crosstalk on RT, and George Samueli, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute. You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, back on the other side of this break.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guests for this segment, Peter Lavelle, American journalist and host of Crosstalk on RT, and George Samueli, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute and author. And together, they are the hosts of Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle. That is airing now on YouTube. Just give it a search on YouTube. Also, you can follow Peter on Twitter at PL Crosstalk, and you can follow George on Twitter at George Samueli. And I'm briefly going to spell your last name out. That starts with an S and a Z, Samuely. In any event, Peter, George, thank you again for being with us. Where should people turn if they want the real news on this election and in general? I mean, Fox News, CNN, NBC, I mean, so many of these, you can just disregard them. Even Drudge Report spun against Trump a couple of years ago. As far as I can tell, there's pretty much a barrage keeping up this media wall. And this includes, of course, Twitter, Facebook, Twitter literally suppressing, and along with Facebook, pretty much every one of Trump's tweets and posts about allegations of electoral fraud. So where would you recommend that people go?
Well, what I do is I listen to legal experts that I've come to trust, okay? Not Mr. Toobin, okay, because he's busy right now. But I mean, Jonathan Turley, for example, Kenneth Starr. You really have to make an effort here. You're right. I mean, we're all being gaslit here. As far as what's going on in Fox, well, George and I have had long conversations about what's going on in Fox. What do you think, George?
Well, I think Rupert Murdoch looks to his bottom line. Murdoch has never been a particular Trump fan. Let's remember in 2016, he tasked Megyn Kelly to take Trump out, and it failed. So eventually, Murdoch kind of made his peace with Trump. But now that he sees Trump, staggering, he's of course jumped in and decides to put the boot in. So I think that Murdoch is essentially a corporate man, and he's making his peace with the incoming Biden team. And again, I mean, Trump's policies basically on immigration, non-interventionism, on trade, have never really suited Murdoch. I mean, Murdoch has always been an ardent interventionist. Again, that helps his bottom line. He's been an open borders person on immigration. And clearly, he has extensive business interests in China. So all down the line, Trump's policies really did not favor Murdoch.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting aspects of this is that Biden really does work well with Republicans. I mean, it seems to be a central or centrist administration. I think we call it the return of the establishment, where you have Biden and a bunch of Republicans, Mitt Romney types, the war hawks, the Bowdens of the world, that basically find in Joe Biden a kindred soul. Especially from the standpoint of against Trump. And so what do you think this is going to look like from the standpoint of an administration? I mean, they've asked Romney apparently to be in it. You have other right-wingers who apparently they're asking to be in administration. Kasich is hoping to get a pull into the admin. What does this mean? What is this? Like the establishment basically taking back dominance of some sort? Like it's a really strange mix in regards to choice, in regards to an administration. But over the past, 34 years, or for how many other years Biden has been in Congress, these are his policies. I mean, they do fit more in line with, let's say, a straightforward Republican or moderate Republican as opposed to anything that you would consider on the left. What do you think that means for this upcoming administration, especially from the standpoint of 2024?
Well, first of all, Biden is a liberal Republican. I mean, the few times he even spoke on the campaign trail, he made that clear. Defunding the police and things like that, healthcare. He really defaults back to more of a traditional liberal Republican position here. In terms of foreign policy, you're right. The uniparty is back. Okay, but George and I have a very different take on this. Biden is. If he does cross the line and he is inaugurated in January, then he will have served his purpose. There's no other purpose for him because the party was afraid of running someone like Bernie Sanders because they thought that would be too extreme. Well, if you look at a lot of the demographics, a lot of people like what Bernie Sanders has to say, and all of the slurs against him, and this is coming from a conservative, are really quite disgusting. Bernie Sanders, for all of his faults, is a policy guy, and some of his policies are really quite interesting. So Biden is just an avatar And I would fully suspect that if he is inaugurated, that they will make short shrift of him, and he won't be there for very long. I mean, they tried to pull the 25th Amendment on Trump. They'll pull it on Biden. Just watch.
Yeah, I think Peter's absolutely right. I think that Biden will have served his purpose. I think that when it comes to domestic policy, and I think it's quite likely Republicans do win at least one of those seats in Georgia, that basically they'll have a majority in the Senate, in which case there'll be very limited scope for any domestic legislation in a Biden or Harris administration or Harris-Biden administration. So therefore, what do administrations do when Congress isn't on their side? They focus on foreign policy. And I think here, a Biden administration will be very dangerous. This is something we've talked about again on the gaggle, which is that he will pursue classic interventionist neocon, neoliberal policy, and particularly against Russia. And I think that the policy will largely be directed at making life as difficult and as painful for Russia as possible. So I fully expect some serious confrontation with Russia in Syria, and in the Caucasus, in the Black Sea, in the Baltics. And I think that that's where a Biden administration will focus on. And these Republicans that you mentioned will go along with this very happily. I remember Romney in 2012 saying, Russia is our number one existential threat, or whatever cliche he used. So that's I think where I see the Biden administration heading.
And that, of course, that would have the uniparty support. That's I mean, Trump here again. Trump seems to be the sort of volatile dissident candidate, as he was back in 2016, who wouldn't necessarily go along with that. And for all that he was hammering Russia during the last debate here, he's been reasonable. I'll put it like that. He's been reasonable, especially in light of the fact that for the last 4 years, he was continuously hammered for being soft on Russia, for having all of these, shady supposed tries, obviously long since debunked. Just to sum up here, Trump seems like he would be the slightly more dissident candidate. Biden, frankly, would have less of a problem with Republicans, like you're saying, if he focuses on foreign policy, because hammering Russia, hammering America's supposed enemies around the globe is something that both of the parties can agree on. Where do you're talking about going after Russia? What do you think with Iran and China? I mean, specifically Trump with the trade war against China, that was his number one foreign policy foe. For the Republicans, at least explicitly, that was theirs too. Do you think that would change? How do you think that would go in the next year or so?
Go ahead, George.
Well, I think that in the case of China, I suspect he will go back to the Obama policy, which is the return to the TCPP, which was, after all, again, a signature Trump policy of walking away from that. Again, Biden, the Biden family has made a lot of money on China, and he has pointedly never said anything negative about China in any, or at least anything comparable to the vitriol that he spews against Russia. So I think that you can bet that he will return to that trade agreement. And I think on Iran, there's a lot of unfounded speculation that he's going to return to the JCPOA because the Obama administration. To return to the JCPOA means that he would have to take on the Zionist lobby in the United States at a very early stage in the administration. This is a weak administration. It can only get by means of a consensus. And that would, going back to the JCPOA, would be very controversial. So I don't at all expect him to return to it. He's going to insist on all sorts of demands from Iran: give up your ballistic missile program, limit your influence in the Middle East, and Iran isn't going to accept anything like that. So I think that's what I think on those two. But I think that the focus will be antagonizing Russia.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd like to make a point here. I think it's really important is that if we're going to have the uniparty foreign policy, and we're not going to have any major domestic policy initiatives, then it begs the question, well, why was Trump elected in 2016? Okay, because he addressed the issues that the public was interested in, particularly trade deals. Now, if the Biden-Harris administration is going to avoid all the reasons why people voted for Trump, there'll be a reckoning, okay? It's only putting things on pause because that puts Trump, if he wants to run again, in a lane all on his own. I mean, these elites don't learn anything at all. The elites didn't have a 2016 autopsy, and they're not going to have one now, and they do it at their peril because during conditions of this economic turndown and this pandemic, desperation roams the land, and I think people underestimate that because the media is so controlled.
How can we tell, just real quick, how can we tell ignorance from malice? You're talking about elite ineptitude, specifically just self-delusion there. Is that they don't know better? Is that they've sort of built up these systems, the ivory towers, just it gets the idea across that prevents them from seeing the plight of their ways? Or is there explicitly, a bent towards extracting wealth and disregarding the consequences? Does it matter? What's your take?
That happens under both parties, okay? No, the difference is that the left is this ideologically possessed. It informs its behavior, okay? And that's why it makes what makes them very, very dangerous, because it's basically a cult. And they're true believers in this cult because it's the professional managerial class, okay, and they just know better, and they're so dead set believing that, and it's wrong. They're often wrong.
You mean Democrats?
Rather look at the Democratic Party today as essentially a coalition. You have a coalition of the shock troops, and the shock troops are Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and they're there to insist on ideological conformity and to terrorize anyone who evades ideological conformity. And then you've got the think tank crowd, lavishly funded by the military-industrial complex. You've got the big finance, which, of course, loves a policy of deindustrialization and financialization of the economy. And then you've also got big tech, which is now going to be working hand in glove with the Biden administration to restrict all speech that goes contrary to the Democratic Party. So I think it's the kind of coalition, the shock troops in the streets, and then you've got big tech, big finance, and big military in the boardroom.
I'm telling you, the Antifa and Black Lives, I think you guys are talking about Democrats when you keep saying the left. It's throwing me slightly.
Yeah, the Democrats. Yeah, absolutely.
Also, Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is about to be erased.
There's nothing really leftist about any of this.
Mark my words. Black Lives Matter is about to be erased. The moment that Joe Biden takes office, you're not going to hear anything else about Black Lives Matter. As opposed to Antifa, who knows? I don't think they're Democrats per se, but fair enough. I take your point.
Kept in cryosuspension for the next, or kept in a state of stasis for the next election, or for some other relevant political moment. I mean, we'll see. In any event,
I mean, because I think you guys are right. Unfortunately, if nothing gets done, then what happens from the standpoint of Biden running into that next election? Let's assume Biden is even there, and so it's a fair opportunity for a wipeout. So yeah, I take you guys at your point is absolutely fair.
Yeah, but it means nothing is resolved. Nothing has been resolved. Not with this election and not with the future of the country. Nothing has been resolved.
The pendulum just keeps getting pushed further. We're out of time. Yeah. I'm sad to say, a great conversation, guys. Thank you for joining us. Peter Lavelle, American journalist and host of Crosstalk on RT, and George Samueli, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute and author, and together the hosts of Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle. That is airing now on YouTube. Go check it out. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're going into a break, and on the other side of this break, we are taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. Please do call in. Our lines are now open. Back in a minute. Fault Lines. See you on the other side.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area.
Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas. That is my co-host and myself, Shane Stranahan. And we are taking your calls. That's right. You could be joining us any moment now. 202-521-1320 is the number. Again, 202-521-1320. We've got Tarif from New Orleans calling on the line. Tarif, as always, thank you for your call. What's going on this morning, man?
How y'all doing, gentlemen? Like I was saying yesterday, I was saying about Trump should release half of the file dealing with the assassinations and programs. If he don't get back in office, if it looks like he's going to lose, he should release every file known to man of assassinations, free Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, all whistleblowers. Look into my case, Tyree Simon, VA water in Houston contaminated, Mikey DeBakey. Anything, Project MK Ultra, the Dr. King assassination, Malcolm X assassination, RFK assassination, JFK assassination, and so forth. He should release it all if he think that they're going to keep him out, So, that's all I have to say for right now.
That would be a bombshell. Yeah, I mean, if you were to do the two main policy proposals there you're recommending, one, he pardon whistleblowers, and two, you release a bunch of files on the shady intelligence stuff that our intelligence agencies have done over recent decades. That'd be a bombshell. I mean, the second one especially. I agree with the sentiment. And as always, Tarif, thank you for the call. We're still taking calls, of course, 202-521-1320. Joe, calling in from Arizona. Joe, you're on the line. What's going on?
You guys, first, I just love your show so much. That's one. Jamarl Thomas, you're one of my favorites, dude. Number two is, have you guys heard much about David Dayen's Day One agenda? He's with the American Prospector, and it's like 30 things that Joe Biden could just get going, and they're pretty monumental things with his signature. And so just kind of if you anything about that, and if perhaps could have him on your show.
This is the plan where Biden basically could sign a bunch of executive orders, like overturning things that Trump did, or basically pushing through legislation that doesn't require Congress. Is that what this is?
Yeah, it's actually through executive action, and it's through existing legislation that's out there that he can, through his executive power, access. It's not really an executive order. I guess kind of per se it is, but it's not like, the thing that we heard, about just President Obama ramming executive orders, the biggest nonsense story I ever heard in my life.
Right.
6 years.
Well, they make those attacks to prevent behavior. It's like, for example, Nixon can go to China and Nixon can get away with it because Nixon's supposed to be a hardcore right winger. And if Nixon is doing it, then it's permissible. It's a man thing that permits it. Or Bill Clinton can sell, the elimination of Glass-Steagall because he's a lib. And as a lib, if he's doing it and he's on the left, then it has to be okay. And these are the realms of debate. But when you're attacking the other person, you're trying to restrain their behavior. You have some people who say, well, yeah, I am, I embody this, in which case they defend the ground. But oftentimes those people pull back instead of, going for it. So if they say, oh, Obama's pushing all of these executive orders out, well, they're going to have a contingent of people who believe it just because they said it. And it creates a debate just because someone is debating about it.
Wouldn't he have to? I mean, this is the thing with Trump doing the executive orders too. It's you're going up against harsh political opposition. I mean, this is just the state of politics in America in general. If each side wants absolute control, if you have a Democrat president and a Republican Congress, you're going to have a hard time getting Democrat policies through. Even if there's a political momentum to get progressive policies through, whatever that looks like. Well, if they're genuinely lefty policies, you're going to have hard time getting those through. And the same thing goes on the obverse, of course. If you get a Republican president and a Democrat Congress, Democrat House, whatever the case may be, you're going to have a hard time getting through. And so each side in either of these cases is going to have a problem. And then, of course, as a Democrat, if you see the Republicans taking, the executive, the House, and the Senate, you're going to oppose that, and the same goes for the inverse. It's just like this. We're stuck in this state of play, and as things get more and more polarized as time goes on, the level of emotional volatility, the vicissitudes increase, and it's an ugly state here. But I mean, I guess my point there with the executive orders is you would have to, as a president dealing with a contentious political situation there, that is, you do that by fiat. That's your hope of getting it through, because communication appears to have broken down almost completely.
But see, that's not, I mean, the thing is, they agree on most things. Like, believe it or not, there is consensus on most, like, if you think of Wall Street, for example, there's consensus on that. You can't vote against that. You can't vote against the military-industrial complex. You can't vote against corporations having this much influence. You can't vote against the rich not get, like, those things just seem to be off the table and agreed by both parties. Now, they would argue about, bathrooms, gay bathrooms. Should we have bathrooms that multiple sexual identities can go to? Yeah, it's like they fight.
Or a response to the pandemic. Well, no, that's the thing. You say they agree on most things, and I totally get where you're coming from. They agree on a lot of the really bad stuff. The lowest common denominator stuff is broadly are those issues that make the American empire more powerful to the detriment of the American people, not to mention people around the world. But that's not most things. And in some sense, there's no use pushing back on the specific phrase that you used there. No, I think that's a small minority of issues. They're dramatically important. They're outsized in importance, but most things would include conversation about healthcare, some real compromise, some real long-term conversation about how to solve that problem, poverty, situation with drugs, the future of technology, the problems with the corruption in the American political system itself. Like, there are so many things that are not on the table, or at least that aren't being talked about, right? That should be, and that those are most things. I guess that's my point. We got a couple other callers though.
Wait. But I guess that's what I'm saying, Shane. Those are things that are off the table because they basically agree. Like, if you think of the things that they fight about, it's minor differences. I mean, we're talking about like a gradient of difference. Like, Democrats would say, we want Obamacare, and Trump says, okay, here's Trump care.
Yeah. Yes. And the rest of it really is off the table. I get what you're saying. Most of the stuff that's on the table, they actually do agree on. It's what's being left out of the discussion that really is frightening. Looking at the future of our country. And
I think we're saying the same thing. We're saying it in different ways, but we agree. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is conversation. We've got Adam calling in from Colorado. Got enough time, I think, for one more call after Adam, and then Michael, 202-521-1320. Adam, you're on. What's going on?
Yes, I wanted to read a couple lines directly from Pfizer's press release. The bullet points at the top. One of them says, analysis evaluated 94 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in trial participants. And the other one, clinical trial to continue through to final analysis at 164 confirmed cases in order to collect further data and characterize the vaccine candidate's performance against other study endpoints. In other words, they are specifically using 94 confirmed cases from those that have taken the vaccine in order to apply for the emergency use authorization from the FDA. So I just wanted to give more context to what is currently being used to go ahead and say that the vaccine from Pfizer is 90% effective.
Interesting. So I just want to be clear. I'm reading through this as well right now. You're saying that that the point you're making here is that they have a certain cap of confirmed cases, 164 cases, that they need to reach in order to get the emergency use authorization, and they're sort of continuing the trial until they get to that point. Is that right, Adam?
Use the interim results from 94 patients to apply for it. The application is already in. That's a different bullet point. Submission for emergency use authorization to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration planned for soon after the required safety milestone is achieved, which is currently expected to occur in the third week of November.
That's next week, to be clear.
Yes. So they are already getting their ducks in a row to apply, because you can't know when you'll have the 164 confirmed case number to finish the clinical trial, which then also begs the question, why is that number so low?
You mean 90%? You're talking about 90% as a low number? I mean, that's
164 confirmed cases. The effective rate of it is very different from the sample size that is being used.
I guess one thing that's unclear to me, though, and we only have so much time for this, but one thing that's unclear to me is whether those confirmed cases, I think those are the people who, that's basically the 10%. In other words, you have approximately 1,000 people in the trial, 94 of whom who received the vaccine, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, 94 got COVID. You know, it was not sufficient to prevent them from getting it. But I'm probably getting that wrong. What's your take, Adam?
What it is the study enrolled 43,538 participants. So that means that they have given it to that many people. They then go ahead and have to confirm that the people have come in contact and that they actually have possibly been infected, hence the confirmed cases. Well, you can't always say with the lockdowns, this, that, the other, how many people are going to come in contact with the virus and when. So this is part of the reason you do it out over time, and it normally takes 4 or 5 years for longitudinal studies. What they're doing instead is once they hit the 164 confirmed cases or the 94 confirmed cases to apply for the emergency use authorization, they then plan on doing a wide deployment and then watching those that get the vaccine after the wide deployment under the emergency use authorization for a period of 2 years.
Using
a lot. Okay, a lot here. We're out of time. I mean, that's what you would have to do in this kind of a fast-paced vaccine testing scenario. But sadly, we're out of time. Michael in Michigan, I'm sorry that we didn't get to you. Please call back in tomorrow. Yeah. Appreciate the call. We're signing off today. Thank you to engineers Cam and Raheem. Pardon me. Thank you to producers Cam and Raheem. Thank you to engineer Andre. Thank you to Jamarl Thomas for being my co-host. And thank you for listening. See you again tomorrow, folks. Have a great day.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We put another one in the books. Great show today. Peter Lavelle and his co-host, what is it? Samlzy or something. I can't pronounce the last name. I need to see it to pronounce it, unfortunately. Both of those guys are great. I like their opinion. I don't know if I entirely agree with them. I think I agree with them mostly on some of this stuff. They consider Democratic Party the left, which always grates me, because when I hear them, I'm like, they're not the left. They're not the left. All right, I'm going to end this here because I want to get some shows in for today. So I am going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I will see you guys in a few. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.